The most powerful gang boss in the whole city of Chicago got down on one knee right in front of a small bakery girl. It was 10 o'clock at night, and the reason he did it left her completely speechless. But to understand why this man, the one every single person in Chicago was scared of, would do something that crazy, we have to go back 5 days earlier, back to a drawing made with colored pencils. Why does my picture only have 2 people? Little Maya's voice was shaking as she stared down at her paper. Every other kid in the whole class had drawn 3 people. The preschool teacher came and knelt down next to her. All around the room, other kids were proudly holding up their family pictures. A dad, a mom, brothers, and sisters. But Maya's paper had only 2 stick people standing next to each other. Every family is different, sweetheart. Some families have 2 people, some have more. But Maya shook her head. Her tiny hand was squeezing a red-colored pencil so hard her knuckles turned white. But someone asked me, "Where's your mom?" And I said, "I don't know." That afternoon, a big black SUV pulled up in front of the school gate. The car door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, wide shoulders, a small scar running along the left side of his jaw, gray eyes cold as steel. His name was Daniel Hargrove, the kind of man who, when he walked down a sidewalk, people would move out of the way on their own. But the teacher was already waiting at the door, and she wasn't looking at him. She was looking into the corner of the room where Maya sat all by herself, curled up, holding her princess backpack. Her big brown eyes were red and watery. "Mr. Hargrove, Maya had a very hard day today. We need to talk." Daniel looked at his daughter. His jaw got tight. He nodded, picked Maya up into his arms without saying a single word. The little girl wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face into his shoulder. She was light as a feather, so small, like the whole world was sitting on the shoulders of a child who was almost 4 years old. His right-hand man, Marcus, opened the car door. On the way back home, Maya sat quietly, staring out the window. Her hand pressed the crumpled drawing tight against her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't talk. She was just silent. And that silence was way scarier than any crying could ever be. Marcus glanced into the rear-view mirror, then quietly looked away. He had seen terrible things in his life, but the silence of a 3-year-old was something he just couldn't handle. Then, all of a sudden, a tiny little sentence floated up in the middle of the car, soft as a breath, but heavy as a hammer. "Daddy, Mom left because I'm a bad kid, didn't she?" The car went completely still. Marcus hit the brakes without even thinking. And Daniel, whose hands had never shaken holding a weapon, whose hands had signed orders that made the entire underground world of Chicago bow their heads, was now trembling as he reached out and took his daughter's little hand. He turned to look at Maya, and for the very first time in his life, the undisputed king of the shadows didn't know what to say. Daniel couldn't breathe. Maya's question hit him like a bullet straight through the chest, more painful than any real gunshot he had ever taken in his life. He looked at his daughter's big brown eyes in the rearview mirror. Eyes waiting for an answer he simply did not have. "Marcus, pull over." His voice came out rough and raw. Marcus didn't ask why. His hands moved smooth and steady on the wheel, guiding the SUV to the side of the road. Daniel unclipped his seatbelt, turned toward the back seat, and pulled Maya into his arms. She was weightless, so small that he could wrap his entire body around her in a single hug. He held her tight, his chin resting on the top of her head, breathing in the strawberry-scented baby shampoo he bought every single month but had never quite figured out how to use properly on her hair himself. "Listen to me. You are not bad. You have never been bad. You are the most perfect thing I have ever had in this entire life." Maya didn't push him away, but she didn't hug him back either. She just sat still in his arms, the crumpled drawing still trapped between her tiny hands. Then, why did Mom leave, Daddy? Daniel closed his eyes, and the memories came crashing down like a black waterfall from 3.5 years ago. That mansion had been just as cold back then as it was now, but there had been another woman in it. Claire, blonde hair, blue eyes, a smile Daniel once believed would be the last thing he'd see every night before falling asleep. But Claire had stopped smiling. It started the night she found bloodstains on the concrete floor of the storage room behind the house. Then the night she heard gunshots echo from the basement at 3 in the morning. And then the night when a man named Victor Reyes sent her an envelope. Inside was a photograph of Claire pushing Maya's stroller in the park. Underneath it, in messy handwriting, were a few words. Leave, or the baby pays for it. Claire never told Daniel about that photograph. She didn't tell him because she knew Daniel would answer with violence. And violence would only make more violence, and their 6-month-old baby girl would grow up in the middle of a war. So one November morning, while Daniel went to work and Maya slept in her crib, Claire placed a letter on his pillow. She kissed her daughter's forehead one last time, and she disappeared. The letter had only 2 lines. I have to leave so she can be safe. Don't look for me. Daniel looked anyway, of course he did. He tore through all of Chicago. Called every contact he had. Put up rewards. Made threats. Kicked down doors. But Claire vanished like she had never existed. It took 3 months before he found Victor's photograph. It was hidden in the bedside drawer Claire always kept locked. And then he understood. His wife hadn't left because she didn't love their child. She left because she loved her too much. Because the world Daniel had built was too dangerous for a baby. Because he was the reason, and he knew that better than anyone. But what could he tell Maya right now? That her mother had been threatened with death by his enemies. That her mother ran because her father was the kind of man people ran from. That he was the reason she didn't have a mom. Maya was only 3. She believed princesses always got rescued. She believed her father was the strongest man in the whole world. He couldn't tell her the truth, because the truth would destroy the only image of him his daughter had left. Sometimes adults have to leave for very complicated reasons, princess. Reasons even Daddy can't explain. But I promise you Mom didn't leave because you were bad. She left because she thought it was the best way to keep you safe. Maya lifted her face to look at him. Her eyes were still red, but there was something else in them now. Something a 3-year-old shouldn't have. Doubt. Is Mom coming back, Daddy? Daniel stayed silent. Marcus glanced into the rearview mirror, then turned his face away. Outside the window, the city slid by, gray and cold and not caring at all. And inside that car, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, the man who ruled the city's shadows couldn't find a single answer for his little girl. The SUV pulled up in front of the iron gate of the mansion. 2 layers of security cameras swept over the car before the gate slowly swung open. Marcus drove through the wide courtyard, where 2 guards in black suits gave a nod, and then went back to their posts. Daniel lifted Maya out of the car. She still held the crumpled drawing pressed to her chest. Her eyes were dry now, but still puffy. The front door opened, and they stepped into the house Daniel called home, even though it had never truly felt like one. The living room was huge. The ceiling was nearly 16 feet high. A crystal chandelier hung above. Italian leather sofas, an oak table polished so shiny you could see your own face in it. Everything was expensive. Everything was perfect, and everything was ice cold. Not one family photo on the walls. Not one little drawing stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. No laughter, no smell of baking, nothing that said a 3-year-old was growing up here. This house felt more like a fortress than a warm nest. And Daniel knew it, but he had no idea how to change it. He knew how to build an empire, how to make enemies kneel, how to make more money than 3 generations could ever spend. But he didn't know how to turn these 4 freezing walls into a place his daughter actually wanted to come home to every day. Daniel set Maya down on the living room floor. She stood there for a moment, looked around the empty room, then quietly walked to the corner where her box of colored pencils sat next to her sketch pad. She sat down on the cold marble floor, opened the box, and started to draw. Daniel watched from a distance. He wanted to go closer, but he had nothing left to say. Whatever comfort he had already run out back in that car. He stepped away to the kitchen and told the housekeeper to start making dinner for Maya. When he came back, his daughter was still in the same spot, hunched over her paper with a focus no 3 year-old should ever have to carry. He walked closer and knelt down beside her, and he saw the drawing. This time it wasn't 2 stick people. It was 3. The smallest one stood in the middle, with 2 little pigtails sketched in messy lines. That was Maya. The tall figure on the left had no hair. That was Daddy, and on the right was the 3rd figure. Taller than Maya, but shorter than Daddy, long hair brushing her shoulders, a purple dress, red shoes. Daniel stared at it and felt his chest squeeze tight. Who is this princess? Maya didn't look up. She just kept coloring the shoes red. This is the mom I want to have. This mom has long hair so she can braid my hair. This mom wears a purple dress because purple is my favorite color. This mom wears red shoes because red shoes are the prettiest. She said it in a calm, flat voice, like she was just describing a cartoon character, not sketching out the mother she had been longing for since the day she became aware of what was missing. Daniel swallowed hard. It's a beautiful picture, princess. Maya set down the pencil and turned to look at him. Her big brown eyes, the same as his, held something his eyes didn't have, hope. Hope so fragile it would crack if you so much as touched it. How many days until my birthday? 5 days. You asked me what present I wanted, I remember. What do you want, princess? Maya took a deep breath, like she was getting ready to say something really big, something important, something she had been thinking about for days but hadn't had the courage to say out loud yet. I want a mom at my birthday party. Daniel didn't move. All my friends have a dad and a mom who come. Megan has a mom who makes the birthday cake. Tyler has a mom who braids hair really pretty. Olivia has a mom who sings the birthday song the best in the whole class, and I only have Daddy. Maya's voice wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was accepting. Resigned, like having only Daddy was something she had gotten used to, but something that still hurt every single day. I want a mom to braid my hair every morning, to sing to me before I sleep, to hug me when I have nightmares instead of Daddy having to carry me to his room. Tears started rolling down Maya's cheeks, but she didn't wail. She cried the way children do when they are used to being sad quietly, without making a fuss, just letting the tears fall and then wiping them away on their own. It's not fair, Daddy. Daniel pulled her into his arms. Maya pressed her face to his chest and finally cried out loud. A small, choked, trembling sound. He held her with both arms. Hands that had squeezed enemies' faces, hands that had grabbed traitors by the throat, now shaking as they stroked the hair of his 3-year-old daughter. He could give orders to all of Chicago. He could make anyone do anything. But he couldn't give his child the one thing she needed most in this whole world. That night, after Maya fell asleep, Daniel sat alone in the pitch-black living room. He didn't turn on a light. He didn't pour a drink. He just sat there. On the table in front of him was the drawing with 3 stick people. The woman in the purple dress and red shoes standing next to his daughter, holding her hand. A smile drawn in the clumsy curved line of a child who couldn't even write her own name yet. And in the darkness of a mansion worth millions of dollars, Daniel began to think of something completely insane. Daniel had been sitting in his office for 2 hours since Maya fell asleep. This room was the one place in the whole house he absolutely refused to let his daughter step inside. And there was a reason. The left drawer of his desk had a loaded gun. The right drawer had 3 cell phones he swapped out every week. On the wall behind him was a map of Chicago stuck full of colored pins. Red for territory, blue for allies, black for enemies, yellow for places that needed to be taken care of. His world had seeped into every single brick of this house, even into the bedroom of a 3-year-old lying 2 doors away. He stared at the drawing of 3 stick people he had carried up from the living room. It now sat right next to the gun, the woman in the purple dress and red shoes, the mother his daughter dreamed of. He didn't have a woman in his life, not since Claire disappeared. He hadn't looked at anyone, hadn't gotten close to anyone, hadn't let a single person learn there was a child inside this mansion. Because anyone who got close to Daniel became a target. And he had learned that lesson through his own wife. But Maya needed a mother, not forever, just for the birthday party. just long enough so she wouldn't be the only child in the room with no one holding her hand except her father. Then he remembered the bakery. Last month, Marcus had bought a test birthday cake for Maya from a small shop in a neighborhood nearly 40 minutes from the mansion. It was a habit in their world. Marcus always ran a full background check on the owner before buying anything for the boss's daughter. The report was on the tablet Marcus had shown him 2 weeks earlier, and Daniel still remembered every single line. Sophie Bennett, 27 years old, light brown hair, born and raised in that neighborhood. Her father died when she was 15, a workplace accident at a steel plant. Her mother, Helen Bennett, 50, 6 years old, was currently being treated for stage 3 cancer at a major hospital downtown. Sophie had dropped out in her 3rd year of an early childhood education program to take care of her mother and keep the family bakery running. The bakery had existed for 2 generations, but money had been falling fast over the past year, medical debt piling up. Rent behind, no criminal record, no history, no ties to any organization, completely clean, just a young woman slowly drowning trying to keep her mother alive. But what stuck in Daniel's mind wasn't the report. It was the moment he had brought Maya into the shop that day to pick out a cake design. Maya was tasting a little bite of cake with strawberry frosting when a streak of cream splattered right onto the owner's dress. Daniel had been ready to apologize and offer to pay for the dry cleaning, but the light, brown-haired girl knelt down to Maya's level, smiled with her eyes and not just her mouth, and said, "It's okay, sweetheart. Strawberry cream is the prettiest color. Now my dress is a princess dress too." Maya had laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh Daniel rarely ever heard from his daughter. And that girl had looked at Maya with an expression he couldn't quite describe. Something soft and natural, like kneeling to talk to a little girl covered in frosting, was the most ordinary thing in the world. Daniel remembered standing there watching the two of them for just a few seconds, and in those few seconds, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. He knew this idea was insane. He knew it was wrong by every normal moral measure, but Daniel Hargrove didn't live by normal morality. He lived by decisions, and he made one. 10 o'clock at night, Marcus. His voice came through the intercom. "Bring the car around, we're going." Marcus didn't ask why, he never did. 20 minutes later, the black SUV parked in front of the small bakery. The neighborhood at night was quiet, street lights weak and yellow, a few bars in the distance still leaking music. But the bakery was still lit up inside. Through the glass door, Daniel saw the young woman wiping down the tables. Light brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, a white apron dusted with flour, her frame slim, her shoulders slightly bent from exhaustion. She wiped the tables with slow, mechanical motions, the way someone does after a 60-hour shift when all they want is to go home, but they're not done yet. Marcus stood guard by the SUV, arms crossed, face blank. Daniel stepped up to the bakery door and knocked. The woman looked up, looked outside, saw the man in the black suit and the SUV behind him. She pointed at the closed sign and turned back to her tables. Daniel knocked again, harder, please, just 5 minutes. Sophie froze. She stared at him through the glass, stared at the black car, stared at the big man standing watch outside. Every single survival instinct in her body told her not to open that door. But there was something in the eyes of the man standing in front of her, something that didn't match how scary he looked on the outside. She unlocked the door. "We're closed. If you want to order a cake, come back tomorrow morning. I'm not here for cake." Daniel stepped inside, standing in the middle of the shop among the old wooden tables and the glass display case full of pastries. At nearly 6'3", he looked like a giant who had wandered into a dollhouse. He told her about Maya, about the drawing with 2 stick people, about the red, rimmed eyes sitting alone in the corner of a preschool classroom, about a birthday wish he had no idea how to fulfill. Sophie listened, a cleaning cloth still in her hand, her back against the register counter. Her face shifted from tired to confused, from confused to something softer. And then Daniel said it plainly. "I need you to pretend to be my wife for 2 weeks, 3 days before the birthday party, the day of the party, and 10 days after, so she won't be in shock when you suddenly leave. He placed an envelope on the counter. This is enough to cover your mother's hospital bills for the next 6 months. Sophie's face went pale. She took a step back until her spine hit the pastry shelf behind her. You know about my mother, not a question. A statement, you've been watching me. I'm careful. I don't put my daughter in the hands of a stranger without knowing who she is. Sophie looked at the envelope, then at him. Who are you? Daniel paused for just a beat. Then he said in a flat voice, calm as someone reading a weather report, I'm a dangerous man. You're smart enough to look at that car out there, look at the man standing guard, and understand I'm not a normal businessman, but I'm not dangerous to you if you agree. Sophie looked at the envelope again. Then she looked at the man in front of her, the faint scar on his jaw, the gray eyes, cold but bloodshot from not sleeping. And she understood she was standing in front of a deal with the devil. The bakery door closed behind Daniel. The little wind chime above it jingled and then went quiet. Sophie stood still with her back against the wooden door. Her knees were threatening to give out. The envelope lay on the register counter, thick, heavy, stark white against the smudges of flour and old coffee stains. She stared at it the way you stare at a bomb with a ticking clock. Outside, the engine of the black SUV faded and disappeared into the city night. She stayed right where she was, still gripping the cleaning cloth, her fingers squeezing until they turned pale. Then her phone buzzed. The screen showed the number for the hospital downtown, a number she knew better than her own. She answered. The woman's voice on the other end was cool and professionally detached, the kind of voice that had delivered bad news so many times it no longer even flinched. Miss Bennett, I'm calling to remind you that the balance on your mother Helen Bennett's chemotherapy costs is past due. If payment isn't received by tomorrow, we will be forced to discontinue her treatment plan per policy. Discontinue her treatment plan. The words rang in Sophie's head like a hammer, sealing a lid shut. Discontinue. You meant stopping chemo. Stopping chemo meant the cancer cells would spread without anything holding them back. And with her mother's stage 3 diagnosis, it meant death. Not death years from now, death in a few months. Maybe weeks, I understand, I'll handle it. She ended the call and set the phone down on the counter right next to the envelope. The two objects lay side by side, a phone carrying a sentence, an envelope holding money that could save a life. Like two hands pressed to her shoulders, one dragging her toward the edge, the other offering a way out she knew wasn't free. Sophie lifted her eyes to the photograph on the bakery wall. An old picture, the edges yellowed with age, showing her mother Helen when she was young. Light brown hair, just like Sophie's now, smiling brightly next to the pastry case on the bakery's opening day. She looked healthy, full of life, a spotless white apron, a tray of fresh, baked cookies in her hands. Next to her stood Sophie's father, broad, shouldered, flour on his hands, smiling with his whole face. He died when Sophie was 15, an accident at the steel plant, and from that day on, Helen carried the bakery alone, raised her daughter alone, paid every single bill alone, stood at the counter until midnight, kneaded dough until dawn so there would be bread on the shelves in the morning. Sophie grew up in the smell of melting butter and the sound of her mother singing softly in the kitchen at 4 a.m. She loved children. She wanted to be a preschool teacher. She made it all the way to her 3rd year in an early childhood education program, until Helen collapsed on the bakery kitchen floor one July afternoon. Cancer, stage 2, then quickly climbing to stage 3. Sophie left school immediately, without hesitation. Without regret, because the bakery needed someone to keep it running, and her mother needed someone to be there for her. The dream of teaching children stayed behind in a dorm desk drawer, along with the child psychology books she never got to finish. Now the bakery was barely surviving. On the best days, she sold a handful of loaves and a few cookies. Debt stacked on debt, rent 2 months behind. Her mother's medical bills were a number Sophie didn't even dare add up because she was terrified of seeing the total. And the envelope on the counter held enough to erase all of it, 6 months of hospital bills, 6 months of her mother staying alive. Being treated, being allowed to keep fighting. The price was 2 weeks pretending to be the wife of a man she knew was dangerous. Sophie picked up the envelope and held it, heavy not just from the cash inside, but from the decision it was asking her to make. She thought about the man's eyes as he talked about his daughter. Those steel-gray eyes that had trembled when he mentioned the drawing with 2 stick people. He had said, "I'm a dangerous man." In the same calm tone someone might use to say they were left-handed. No hiding, no pretty lies, no justification. And somehow that brutal honesty made her believe him about at least one thing. He was desperate for his child, choosing between 2 bad things. Sophie said it out loud into the empty shop. Her voice echoed off the old walls, "And I'm choosing to save my mother." She grabbed her phone and called her Aunt Carol. "Auntie, I need you to watch the bakery for 2 weeks. I have to go handle something." Aunt Carol asked what it was. Sophie said she was helping a family with childcare, not entirely a lie. The next morning, Sophie stood at the iron gate of the Lincoln Park mansion with a small suitcase and a heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. A security camera turned toward her, its lens cold like an eye measuring her up. The gate opened, she stepped through. A second layer of security met her in the entry hall. A guard checked her ID, then led her inside. The mansion was just as cold in daylight as it was at night. Natural light poured through massive windows, but it still couldn't warm the air. No family photographs anywhere. No children's art on the walls. No animal-shaped magnets on the refrigerator. Sophie thought of her own bakery, where her childhood scribbles still clung to the fridge, where pictures of her parents covered the walls, where the smell of butter lived in every single brick. Then she looked around this $1,000,000 house and understood exactly why a child growing up here could feel so terribly alone. Daniel was waiting in the living room, black suit, tie loosened, a cup of coffee gone cold in front of him. He handed Sophie a stack of papers, the fake story. They met 6 months ago, dated in secret, married privately because Daniel valued privacy. Sophie skimmed it and nodded. Then Marcus walked in and placed another document in front of her. A non-disclosure agreement. His voice was flat, without emotion. "You are not allowed to share any information about the Hargrove family, the people here, the schedule, or anything you see or hear while you're in this house. Violations will have consequences." Consequences, the word hung in the air, needing no explanation. Sophie took the pen, but before she signed, she looked straight into Daniel's eyes. "I'm not afraid of paperwork. I've signed loan documents, signed surgical consent forms for my mother, signed enough things that ordinary people never want to sign. What I'm afraid of isn't on paper." Daniel's brow tightened. "What are you afraid of?" "I'm afraid of hurting a child. I studied early childhood education for 3 years before I left. I know what abandonment trauma is. I know how deeply a 3-year-old who has already lost her mother will be hurt if another woman shows up and then disappears again." She signed the agreement, set the pen down, and then asked the question Daniel didn't want to hear. "When the 2 weeks are over, what do you tell her? That another mother left too?" Daniel's face went pale. His jaw clenched, the tendons in his neck stood out, but not from anger. From the fact that the bakery girl had just asked the exact question he had refused to think about for the past 2 days. He, a man who had a plan for everything, a man who ran an underground empire with cold calculation down to the smallest detail, had no answer for this. Daniel still hadn't answered Sophie's question when the sound of the preschool van arrived outside the gate. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and his face transformed in an instant. From a man cornered by a bakery girl's question into a father getting ready to greet his child. Sophie watched that shift and understood. Daniel had spent his whole life wearing masks, and the one he put on for Maya was the only mask he wore with love instead of calculation. The front door opened. The nanny led Maya into the entry hall. The little girl wore a pink dress, her hair tied into 2 uneven braids, a princess backpack on her small shoulders. Maya took 3 steps inside and then stopped. Her big brown eyes found Sophie standing in the living room. And everything in that 3-year-old's body went absolutely still. No smile, no greeting, no question. Maya backed up 2 steps and hid behind her father's leg. Her tiny hands gripped the fabric of Daniel's pants. Her face only half peeking out. Her eyes studying Sophie with a look no child that age should ever have. Measuring, guarded, calculating. These were the eyes of a child who had been left once, and had taught herself never to trust adults again. Daniel knelt down and spoke softly. "Maya, this is Sophie. Daddy told you about her, remember. She's going to be here with us for a while." Maya didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed locked on Sophie, sweeping from head to toe, like she was calculating how long this woman would last before she vanished. Then she opened her mouth, and the first thing she said wasn't hello. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. "You're going to leave too." Sophie's heart tightened. She had prepared for a lot of things: shyness, tears, avoidance. She had not prepared for the cold resignation in the voice of a child who wasn't even 4 years old. There was no anger in that sentence, no sadness, only a truth Maya had learned from experience. Adults come and go, and hoping they will stay only makes it hurt more. Sophie slowly lowered herself to her knees, bringing her eyes level with Maya's. She didn't rush, she didn't push, she didn't paste on an overly bright smile. She just knelt there and opened the small paper box she had brought from the bakery that morning. Inside were heart-shaped cookies, pale pink frosting dusted with powdered sugar, the soft scent of vanilla and butter rising gently. She had been up since 4 in the morning making them, kneading the dough by hand, cutting each one with the heart-shaped cutter her own mother had used since Sophie was a little girl. "I brought you something. Do you want to try one?" Maya looked at the box, then at Sophie, then at the box again. She didn't reach for one right away. It took nearly half a minute before Maya's small hand slowly reached out and picked one up. She smelled it first, then took a bite. She chewed slowly, swallowed, good. One word, no smile, but she didn't walk away either. Maya took a second cookie, bit into it, and looked at Sophie with those big brown eyes. Still careful, but just a little bit less cold, a few degrees warmer. "You make cookies?" "Yeah, I have a bakery." "Do you have a mom?" The question came out suddenly, as casual as asking if Sophie had a cat. Sophie swallowed. "I do, but my mom is very sick. She has to stay in the hospital." Maya stopped chewing. She looked at Sophie with a gaze that only people who have lost something can share, a kind of understanding way beyond her years. "I don't have a mom either." She said it softly, flat, like it was an obvious fact she had accepted a long time ago. Then she bent down and took another cookie, took a big bite, and for the first time since they met, Maya wasn't looking at Sophie with the eyes of someone defending herself. She was looking at her with the eyes of a child eating something delicious. Daniel stood behind them watching. His jaw tight, his eyes red, he turned his head away before anyone could see. That evening, Sophie lay in the guest room Daniel had set up for her. A room as big as the entire bakery back home. King-size bed, velvet curtains, oak furniture, everything expensive, everything unfamiliar. She lay on her back staring at the ceiling, listening to the mansion breathe in the night. The house was too big, too quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet, the hollow kind, the kind that fills places with too many rooms and too few people. Too many objects and too few memories. She thought about the small bakery in her neighborhood, where the refrigerator hummed all night, where flour dust clung to her pillow, where she could hear her mother coughing in the next room, and know her mother was still alive, still fighting. Here she heard only silence. Sophie was drifting into a shallow sleep when she heard a knock. Light, hesitant, the kind of knock made by someone afraid of being turned away. She opened the door. Maya stood there, tiny in her bunny pajamas, clutching a worn stuffed bear, eyes red, rimmed cheeks wet. "I dreamed about a different mom." The different mom came back. She hugged me and then she left again. I called her, but she didn't turn around. Then bad people came, a lot of people. They came to our house. Daddy fought them. Daddy was bleeding. I was scared. Sophie didn't know whether the different mom in the dream was Claire or herself, and that uncertainty hurt more than anything else. But what made her shiver was the second part, the bad people. The violence, Daddy fighting and bleeding, this 3. Old was dreaming about violence she had never actually seen. She was sensing it through late night phone calls where her daddy's voice turned cold, through strange guards standing all over the house, through the office door that was always locked, through the tension adults tried so hard to hide, but children always feel. Sophie didn't speak. She just sat down on the floor, opened her arms wide, and waited. Maya stood there for a moment, staring at her with wet eyes. Then she stepped forward and curled into Sophie's lap like it was the only safe place left in the whole world. She was tiny, weightless, warm, smelling of strawberry shampoo and tears. Sophie held her, stroked her hair, and said nothing. Just held her, and Maya whispered into Sophie's chest, her voice less shaky now, "You smell like cookies. I like that smell." Sophie bit her lip. Tears fell, but she didn't let Maya see. She held the little girl tighter and hummed a lullaby her own mother used to sing to her when she was small. Maya slowly relaxed, her breathing evened out. Her hand still gripped Sophie's shirt even after she fell asleep. Out in the hallway, Daniel stood watching through a crack in the half-open door. He saw his daughter curled in the arms of a stranger, sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. Without needing Daddy to carry her to his room at midnight, without jerking awake, without screaming. Just sleeping, calm, her hand holding the fabric of the woman holding her, and Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. In the place he thought had frozen solid the day Claire left, something warm and soft and more dangerous than any enemy he had ever faced. Because he didn't know how to fight it, and he didn't want to. Morning light slipped through the velvet curtains when Sophie opened her eyes. Maya was still curled against her, one small hand gripping the edge of Sophie's shirt, breathing steady and soft. Sophie didn't dare move, afraid she'd wake her. So she lay still and studied the sleeping face of a 3-year-old, the lightly curled brown strands stuck to her forehead, long lashes casting little shadows over round cheeks, lips parted, a stuffed bear tucked under her chin. In sleep, Maya looked exactly her age, no searching stare, no cold resignation. Just a small child sleeping well. Then Maya stirred, her eyes cracked open, that chocolate, brown gaze foggy with sleepiness as she looked up. She saw Sophie, and her first reaction wasn't a yawn or a sleepy rub. It was a flinch, like she couldn't believe the person she had held onto all night was still there. Then she blinked a few times, stared more carefully, and her face lit up the way only children can light up, a raw brightness that life hasn't dulled yet. "You didn't leave?" she said it loudly, her voice filling the wide room, not a question, a confirmation. Astonishment mixed with a tiny joy, so sharp it almost hurt. The joy of a child who is used to waking up alone, waking up with someone beside her. "I didn't leave." Maya sat up, hair a wild mess, looking at Sophie with eyes that still had a trace of doubt, but had started to want to believe. "Are you hungry?" "I'm hungry." And the two of them went down to the kitchen. The kitchen was the size of half of Sophie's bakery back home, packed with expensive appliances she was pretty sure no one had ever used properly. She opened the refrigerator and found eggs, milk, flour, butter. "Want to make pancakes?" Maya nodded and climbed up onto the tall chair beside the island, feet swinging. Sophie mixed the flour, poured in the milk, whisked until smooth, then turned to Maya. "Do you want to crack the eggs?" Maya's eyes brightened. She held an egg in both hands, careful as if it were a treasure. Sophie showed her how. Tap it gently on the rim of the bowl, then pull it apart. Maya tapped too hard. The egg shattered in her hands. Yolk and white splashed across the island, dripped onto the cold marble floor, smeared onto the sleeve of her bunny pajamas. Maya froze, her little hands, slick with egg, began to tremble. Her eyes went wide, her whole body tightened, like she was waiting for something terrible to happen. She didn't cry. That was somehow worse than crying. She was scared. "I ruined it." Maya's voice was so small Sophie could barely hear it. "I'm sorry. I'll clean it. I'll clean it right now." She reached for a towel, tiny fingers shaking hard, still sticky with egg, and Sophie understood immediately. This wasn't about a broken egg. This was the response of a child used to being judged, used to needing to be perfect, used to believing that any mistake could make someone leave. Sophie gently took the towel from Maya's hand and set it down. Then she knelt until she was eye level with her. "Maya, look at me." Maya lifted her face, eyes already red. "You didn't ruin anything. You're learning. The first time anyone cracks an egg, it goes everywhere. When I was little, I once dropped a whole dozen eggs on the kitchen floor, and my mom had to clean for an hour before it was all gone." Maya blinked. "Really? Really?" "My mom said, broken eggs are okay as long as next time we tap a little softer." Maya looked at Sophie with an expression Sophie could read even though a 3-year-old didn't have the words for it yet. A mix of surprise and something deeper, something Sophie recognized instantly, the feeling of being accepted even when you mess up. Something Maya had never once received from a woman. Sophie handed Maya a second egg. "This time just tap gently." "Okay." Maya took the egg, drew in a deep breath, and tapped softly against the rim of the bowl. The shell cracked cleanly. She pulled it apart, and the yolk slid neatly into the bowl without a single drop spilling. "I did, Maya shouted, eyes huge, looking down at the bowl and then up at Sophie, smiling with her whole face. Sophie clapped. "Perfect, a professional chef right here." And that smile, that bright, wide-open smile that held nothing back, the smile of a child who had done something and been told she did it right, stayed in Sophie's chest all day long. And for many days after, they poured batter into the pan, flipped pancakes, Maya standing on the chair with the solemn expression of someone carrying out the most important mission of her life. Then, while they ate pancakes drizzled with honey, Maya suddenly asked, "Will you teach me how to make those sweet little hearts like yesterday?" "Of course, we'll make them this afternoon." And that afternoon, the two of them stood in the kitchen, Sophie kneading dough, Maya using the cutter to press out misshapen heart shapes. She laughed when the cookies came out of the oven, laughed when they spread icing, laughed when the icing smeared all over her nose. But in the middle of piping the frosting, Maya went quiet. She set the frosting bag down and looked at Sophie with eyes that seemed way older than her years. "Miss Sophie, I don't have any memories with my mom." Sophie's hands went still. "I was too little when she left. I don't remember her face. I don't remember how she hugged me. I don't remember what she smelled like." Maya's voice stayed even. No crying, no blame. Just telling it with the frightening calm of a child who had absorbed pain as a normal part of life. Sophie knelt down, her flower, dusted hands closed around Maya's tiny flower. Dusted hands, "Listen to me. Her leaving wasn't your fault. It was never your fault." Maya watched her, head tilted slightly. "Daddy says that too, but if it's not my fault, whose fault is it?" Sophie couldn't answer that, because she knew exactly where the answer lived, behind the locked office door upstairs, inside the world of guns and blood and territory maps, inside the very man Daniel Hargrove was, but she couldn't say that to a 3-year-old who was looking at her with trust for the first time. On the morning of the third day, Sophie stood in the upstairs hallway and watched Daniel get ready to leave. He knelt in front of Maya in the entry hall, both hands resting on her shoulders, kissed her forehead. "Daddy's going to work. Daddy will be home this afternoon. You stay here with Sophie, okay?" Maya nodded, her stuffed bear in her arms, watching him with that familiar expression. A child who had seen too many adults walk out the door. Daniel stood, straightened his black jacket, fastened his cufflinks, and in that moment, Sophie saw the switch flip as clearly as a light turning on. The soft face of the father vanished. In its place came a clenched jaw, a stormy, calculating expression, heavy steps that moved with purpose. He walked out. Marcus was already waiting by the black SUV. The door shut, and they disappeared behind the iron gate. Sophie didn't ask where he was going. She didn't have the right to ask, and honestly, she didn't want to know the answer. But this mansion wouldn't let her pretend anything was normal. After Daniel left, Sophie took Maya up to the playroom. And on the way, she began noticing what she had been too overwhelmed to see on the first day: security cameras at every corner of every hallway. Small and discreet, but everywhere, in the ceiling, at the baseboards, near the windows. She counted 7 just from the living room to Maya's playroom. 2 guards rotated shifts at the gate. Another patrolled the house, all of them in black suits, earpieces, talking into their radios in a steady stream of codes and numbers. The door to Daniel's office at the far end of the second-floor hallway was always shut, an electronic lock with a red light blinking. Sometimes when Sophie walked past it, she heard a phone ringing inside, even when no one was home. Maya was drawing in the playroom when she looked up and said, in the same casual tone a child might use to talk about the weather, "The machine in Daddy's room keeps making noise. All day and all night, Daddy says I can never go in that room. Even if the door is open, I'm not allowed to step inside." Sophie looked at her and realized Maya had grown up in this house, surrounded by cameras and guards and locked doors, and she thought it was completely normal. That was the most frightening thing of all. Daniel came home at 9 o'clock that night, later than he said he would. Sophie had already fed Maya, bathed her, read her a story, and rocked her to sleep. She went down to the kitchen for water and stopped in the doorway. Daniel stood at the sink with his back to her, his hands under running water. He hadn't changed, still in a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The faucet streamed over both hands. The water ran into the basin, and Sophie saw it had color. She took one more step. He heard her. Daniel turned his head. They looked at each other across the wide kitchen, and Sophie saw it clearly. On the cuff of his shirt, the part he hadn't rolled up yet, there was a dark red smear. Blood, not a lot, but enough to stand out against the white fabric. Enough that no one could pretend it was anything else. The kitchen went silent, the running faucet was the only sound between them. Daniel looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at the blood, then up at his eyes. "It's not my blood." Daniel's voice was even, no excuses. No panic, just the truth, delivered as calmly as a weather report. "I didn't ask." Sophie answered, her voice steady too, though she knew he could hear the tremor hiding underneath it. "But you're thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. Your daughter is sleeping 10 steps away, and you come home with blood on your sleeve." Daniel turned off the faucet. The kitchen became so quiet it felt hard to breathe. He looked at Sophie, then down at his sleeve, then quietly pulled the shirt off, rolled it up, and tossed it into the trash under the sink. Underneath, he wore a fitted black t-shirt, and for the first time, Sophie saw the scars on his arms. Old and new, long and short, a map of violence written into skin. "I protect my family." His voice dropped low and heavy. "Everything I do is so Maya stays safe. You may not agree with how I do it, but don't doubt why." Sophie held his gaze. She didn't step back. She had stepped back enough already, back from the envelope of money, back from the non-disclosure agreement, back from the mansion and the guards and the cameras. But the blood on his sleeve was a line she couldn't retreat from. "What family? This house is cold as a grave. There are 7 cameras from the living room to her bedroom. Your daughter has nightmares about you fighting bad people. She's 3 years old and she already knows which rooms she's not allowed to step into. You call that protecting your family?" His jaw tightened. The tendons in his neck rose. His gray eyes darkened. In that moment, Sophie saw the gang boss Chicago feared. Not the father who knelt to kiss a forehead, but he didn't argue. He only stood there, gripping the edge of the sink, silent, because he knew she was right, and being right hurt more than any wound he was carrying. Sophie turned away, went upstairs, went to her room, and closed the door. Their first real conflict, rough, blunt, with no sweetness in it at all, only the truth laid bare between 2 people standing in a kitchen that still seemed to smell like blood. But at 2 a.m, Sophie couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, thinking about that dark red smear, about the scars, about Daniel's eyes when she confronted him. She went down to the kitchen for water, and as she passed the living room, she stopped. A soft yellow nightlight glowed from the corner. Daniel was sitting on the cold marble floor, his back against the sofa leg, his legs stretched out. Across his lap, Maya lay curled up, her head resting on his thigh, eyes closed, lips parted. He was reading to her. In a small, warm voice Sophie had never heard him use before. Gentle, slow, patient. Each word spoken like it was a gift he was giving his daughter. The book was a princess story, the cover worn soft from being read so many times. He finished a page, looked down at Maya, brushed her hair lightly with one finger, kissed her forehead. Then he whispered, his voice rough, like he was speaking more to himself than to the sleeping child. "I'm sorry for the world I built, my girl. I'm sorry you have to grow up in this house with locked doors and strangers standing guard. I wanted to give you a better world, but I only know how to live in this one." He didn't know Sophie was standing behind the wall, one hand gripping the corner, tears sliding down her cheeks, her heartbeat doing something different. Not love, not yet, but for the first time she saw the real person behind the gang boss, behind the blood on his sleeve and the scars on his arms, behind the cold gray eyes and the clenched jaw. That person was a father breaking apart, sitting on a cold floor at 2 a.m, reading princess stories so his daughter could sleep, apologizing to a child for things the child should never have to know. On the 4th day, Daniel told Sophie to take Maya out to buy decorations for the birthday party. He handed her a card and said flat and brief, "Buy whatever she wants." Then he turned and went into his office. Door closing, red light blinking, Marcus drove the black SUV. A second car followed behind with 2 guards Sophie had never seen before. There was a tail everywhere they went. She sat in the back seat with Maya and watched through the window as the second car held steady at about 3 car lengths. And she wondered if she would ever get used to a life where even buying balloons for a child's birthday party required an armed escort. They stopped at a large party supply store on Michigan Avenue. Marcus stood watch outside the SUV. The 2 guards spread out to either end of the block. Sophie took Maya inside, and the little girl was instantly swept into a world of balloons, tinsel, paper hats, and glittering banners. Maya ran from aisle to aisle, eyes shining, pointing at everything. Pink castle, shaped balloons, silver star garlands, princess tablecloths, paper plates with gold crowns. And as she ran, Maya's hand reached for Sophie's without thinking. A tiny hand slid into a larger one, as natural as breathing, like the automatic reflex of a child, used to holding her mother's hand in a grocery store. Then Maya, startled, realized what she was doing, let go immediately, cheeks flushing red, eyes dropping to the floor. "I'm sorry, I didn't know if I'm allowed to hold your hand." That sentence hurt more than a slap. A 3-year-old who had to ask permission to hold an adult's hand, who had to think twice about the most instinctive act of love. Sophie knelt right there in the aisle between the balloons, took that small hand, and said gently, "Of course you are. If you want to hold my hand, then hold it." Maya looked at Sophie's hand holding hers, then up at Sophie's face, and held on again, this time tighter, and she didn't let go for the rest of the shopping trip. They were choosing birthday candles when an older woman with silver hair walked past, looked at them, and smiled. "Such a sweet family. Your daughter looks just like you." Sophie went still. Maya lifted her face to Sophie. Those wide, innocent eyes waiting, searching. Like this was a test she already knew the answer to. She was waiting for Sophie to say, "Oh no, I'm not her mother." Waiting for the truth. Waiting to be pushed away again. Sophie smiled at the woman. "Yes, ma'am, thank you." The woman walked on. Maya kept staring at Sophie, her grip tightening. It wasn't until they got back to the car that she asked, her voice small and careful, like she was afraid of the answer, "Why didn't you say you're not my mom?" Sophie looked at Maya in the rearview mirror. "Because you were holding my hand, and it felt like the truest thing I could say." Maya didn't say anything else, but she turned to look out the window, and in the faint reflection on the glass, Sophie saw something that looked like a smile. Tiny, fleeting, but there. That afternoon, Marcus called Sophie into the hallway, while Maya watched cartoons. The hospital called. Someone sent fresh flowers to Helen Bennett's room, white roses and yellow daisies, no sender name. I checked the hospital cameras. The delivery came from a flower shop. Order was paid in cash. Marcus's voice stayed level and emotionless. but they both knew there was only one man in that house who paid for everything in cash and never left his name. Sophie didn't say anything. But that evening when Daniel came home, she looked at him longer than usual. He frowned. What? Nothing. She turned away, but he had seen something in her eyes he wasn't used to seeing from anyone. Not fear, not admiration, something close to gratitude, but warmer than that, and Daniel didn't know what to do with it. So he only nodded and walked into his office. On the fifth night, Sophie was sitting in the living room reading when she heard small footsteps on the stairs. Maya appeared holding a pink plastic comb, looking at Sophie with an expression that was half wanting to ask and half afraid of being told no. "Miss Sophie, do you know how to braid hair?" "I do. Come here." Maya sat on the floor in front of Sophie and turned her back, her small shoulders stiff. Sophie began to brush her hair gently, working through each knot without yanking. And she felt Maya slowly relax under her hands, the little shoulders dropping, her breathing slowing. Sophie divided the hair into 3 sections and started to braid, strand by strand, steady and soft. Maya closed her eyes. "It feels like what I imagine having a mom feels like." Sophie didn't stop her hands, because she didn't want Maya to see that her eyes were wet. When she finished, she tied it off with a pink elastic and led Maya to the mirror. Maya looked at herself, 2 neat braids, and she smiled, a real smile, not the polite one for pictures. Not the forced one when Daddy bought a new toy, a bright, genuine smile from the inside, a smile that filled her small face completely. So radiant the cold room seemed to light up. I looked like a princess. Maya turned and wrapped her arms around Sophie's leg, pressing her face into Sophie's knee, giggling. Sophie rested her hand on Maya's head, smoothing her hair, and laughed too, even as tears threatened to spill. Before bed, Sophie tucked Maya in, finished a fairy tale, and was about to stand when Maya grabbed her hand. She pulled a small plastic key from beneath her pillow, yellow, no bigger than a finger, the kind that comes with a dollhouse playset. "Miss Sophie, this is the key to my room. You don't have to knock. You can come in. Anytime I have a nightmare, or anytime you just want to, you can come in." Sophie closed her fingers around the little plastic key, and she understood. This 3-year old had just handed her the most precious thing an abandoned child could ever give anyone. Permission to step into her private world, the place where she slept, where she cried, where she dreamed nightmares about a mother leaving and a father fighting bad men. "Thank you, I'll keep it safe." Maya smiled, then the smile faded. She looked at Sophie and asked in that voice Sophie had heard too many times in the past few days. That calm, quiet, resigned voice, "Miss Sophie, will you still be here after my birthday?" Sophie opened her mouth. No words came out, not because she didn't want to speak, but because any answer she gave would be either a lie or a blade. The silence stretched. Maya looked at her, waiting, then nodded faintly, like the silence itself was the answer she already knew. "It's okay, I know." She turned her back, pulled the blanket up to her chin, hugged her stuffed bear, and closed her eyes. No more crying, no more questions, only acceptance, with a quiet cruelty no child that age should ever learn. Sophie stood outside Maya's door, the small yellow key in her palm, and she understood. A 3-year old had just handed her an entire heart, and in a few days she was going to break it. On the morning of the 6th day, Sophie decided to take Maya to the park. The little girl had been in the mansion for almost a week. Even though the house was enormous, there was nowhere to really run. Nowhere to just breathe air that didn't smell of expensive room fragrance and constant tension that never quite lifted. Marcus drove the black SUV. Sophie noticed that this time there was no second car following behind the way there had been on the party shopping trip. She asked Marcus about it. He only said, short and final, "Today I'm enough." Sophie didn't understand what that meant in the language of people who lived by guns. But she didn't ask again. The park was 10 minutes from the mansion, shaded by green trees, a few families walking dogs, children running across the grass. Normal, safe, at least it looked that way. Marcus parked near the entrance and told Sophie, "I'm staying here, take her in, don't go past the swings." Sophie led Maya into the park. and the little girl looked like she had just been released into paradise. Maya ran straight to the swings, climbed on, her small legs pumping through the air. And for the first time, Sophie heard her laugh out loud. Not the small kitchen giggle or the quiet smile in the mirror, but the full, ringing laughter of a 4-year-old swinging under the sun. "Push me higher, Miss Sophie. I want to fly." Sophie pushed the swing. Maya threw her head back, hair flying, eyes shut, laughing, and in that moment there was no mansion. No cameras, no locked doors, no guards. There was only a child and a woman in a Chicago park on a spring morning. Ordinary enough to hurt, because they both knew it wasn't real. Then everything changed in 3 seconds. Sophie was pushing the swing when a large hand clamped onto her shoulder from behind, firm, decisive. Marcus's voice hit her ear low and tight, like a string about to snap. "Get to the car right now." Sophie didn't even have time to react. Marcus stepped forward and lifted Maya off the swing with one hand. His other hand pressed to Sophie's back, steering her toward the parking lot. Not running, but fast. The kind of movement trained for urgency without drawing attention. Maya panicked. Eyes wide, arms locked around Marcus's neck. "Uncle Marcus, what's wrong?" Marcus didn't answer. He opened the car, put Maya in the back seat. Sophie climbed in beside her. The door slammed. The central locks clicked into place. Marcus took the driver's seat, started the engine, but didn't pull out right away. He checked the rear view mirror, then the right mirror, and Sophie followed his gaze outside. At the end of the path, about 50 meters from where they were parked, a black sedan sat tight to the curb. 2 silhouettes inside. They didn't get out. They didn't turn the engine off. The windows were tinted, but Sophie could still make out the driver's shape turn toward them. "Who is that?" Sophie asked, her voice calmer than she expected. Marcus didn't answer. His left hand stayed on the wheel. His right hand lifted his phone and called Daniel. "We've got a tail at the park. Black sedan, no front plate, 2 men. I'm bringing them back." He hung up, eased out of the lot, turned left. And Sophie saw the black sedan slowly peel away from the curb and follow. Marcus drove with steady control. No sudden moves. He turned onto one street, then right, then left, looping around 3 blocks before returning to the main road. The sedan disappeared after the second turn, but Marcus looped once more before heading back toward the mansion. In the back seat, Maya clung to Sophie, face pressed into her chest, her whole body shaking. "Bad people, Miss Sophie, like in my dream." Sophie held her, stroked her hair, and said words of comfort. She didn't fully believe herself. "It's okay. Uncle Marcus is just being careful." But Sophie's heart was pounding hard enough to crack her ribs, and the hand stroking Maya's hair trembled almost as much as the little girl did. Daniel came home at 7 that evening, earlier than usual, and the face he wore as he stepped through the door wasn't a father's face. It was the face of a boss in fight mode, jaw set, gray eyes dark, footsteps heavy. He spoke with Marcus in the entry hall in a low voice Sophie couldn't make out. Marcus nodded and disappeared outside, probably to tighten security. Daniel went upstairs to Maya's room, kissed her forehead while she slept, then found Sophie in the living room. He closed the door, and for the first time since she arrived, he spoke to her with real weight. Not the voice of a man playing husband. The voice of a powerful man facing a real threat. Victor raises men. They're watching this house. Sophie swallowed. Since when? Marcus noticed it 2 days ago, but couldn't confirm. Today confirmed it. They know there's someone new here. Are they watching me or watching you? Both. Daniel looked straight into Sophie's eyes, and she saw it in his sharp metallic gaze. Not just anger. Fear. He was afraid. The most powerful man in Chicago was afraid, not for himself, for the child asleep upstairs, and for the bakery girl sitting in front of him. This is Victor's game. He looks for weak points. He did it to Claire. Surveillance, photos, threatening letters until she couldn't take it, and she left. Now he sees a new woman in my house, and he's testing who you are, how much you matter, and whether you can be used as leverage. Sophie sat completely still. She heard every word, and every word felt like another brick in a wall closing around her, higher and higher, harder and harder to breathe. She wasn't just pretending to be the wife of a gang boss anymore. She was inside a war zone. She was a potential target. For the first time since she stepped into this mansion, Sophie was truly afraid. Not the vague kind of worry, the kind that turns your hands cold and twists your stomach and makes you want to run for the door and never come back. She looked at Daniel, and he looked back, waiting for her to say she wanted to leave, waiting for her to demand her suitcase, waiting for her to do what any normal person would do after finding out she was being followed by armed men. "You should be afraid," Daniel said it without threat, only naked truth. Sophie looked at him. Then she looked up toward the ceiling, toward the second floor, where Maya was sleeping in the room with the plastic key she had given Sophie, where the little girl believed Sophie would still be there in the morning, believed it with a fragile faith that had taken enormous courage to rebuild after being abandoned the first time. "I am afraid, but I'm not running, not yet." Daniel stared at her, and in those steel gray eyes, Sophie saw something for the first time that looked like respect. Not the respect he'd give an ally or an enemy in his world, but the respect a man gives a 27-year-old bakery girl who was sitting in his mansion shaking and still refusing to run, because a child upstairs had handed her a plastic key, and the last piece of trust she had left. That night, no one could sleep. Sophie lay in her room with her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound in the mansion. The guards' footsteps patrolling the grounds, the static crackle of radios, the wind whistling through a window seam. Every sound could be a stranger's step. One of the shadows from the black sedan she had seen at the park that afternoon. She thought about her mother lying in the hospital. She thought about the small bakery back home. She thought about the normal life she had left less than a week ago, a life that already felt like it belonged to someone else. Then she thought about Maya, about the small hand clinging to her in the back seat, about the trembling question, "Bad people, Miss Sophie, like in my dream?" And she knew she couldn't just lie there any longer. Sophie went down to the kitchen at 1 in the morning, meaning to make a cup of tea to steady her shaking hands, and found the kitchen lights already on. Daniel sat at the island. In front of him was a freshly poured glass of whiskey he hadn't touched, the ice already melting. He wasn't in a suit, just a black t-shirt, his hair slightly messy. He looked tired in a way Sophie had never seen before. Not tired from missing sleep, tired from weight, the kind that sinks into bone and soul, the kind no amount of rest can fix. He looked up when Sophie came in, not surprised, like he had known she'd end up down here sooner or later. "Can't sleep either." Sophie shook her head, poured hot water, dropped a tea bag into a mug. She sat across from him. The island wide between them, the soft yellow overhead light casting their shadows onto the marble. And for the first time since Sophie stepped into this house, they talked, really talked. Not through Maya, not through the fake story, not through conflict or non-disclosure agreements or envelopes of cash. Just two people sitting in a kitchen at 1 in the morning, because both of them were afraid, and neither of them had anyone else to talk to. Sophie spoke first. She didn't even know why. Maybe the darkness and exhaustion had loosened the walls a little. Maybe after that afternoon, she just needed to say something out loud about her real life. The life she had been keeping hidden since she walked through those gates. "My mother's name is Helen. She's the strongest person I know." Sophie stared into her tea, her voice light and slow, like she was turning pages of old memories. "My dad died when I was 15, a steel mill accident. My mom got the call while she was kneading dough in the shop. She put the bowl down, wiped her hands on her apron, went to the hospital, handled everything, then came home and cooked dinner for me. She didn't cry until I was asleep. I know because I pretended to sleep, and I heard her crying in the kitchen until 3 in the morning." Sophie paused. "After that, she worked 16 hours a day, up at 4, kneading dough, opening at 6, closing at 8, cleaning until 10, 7 days a week, no holidays, no trips, never bought a single thing for herself. Everything was for me, tuition, books, lunch money. She used to say, "You just study hard and I'll handle the rest." Sophie smiled. A sad smile. Then she got sick, and I left everything, college, friends, every plan I had. People ask if I regret it. I don't. I'm not afraid of being poor. I'm not afraid of hard work. What I'm afraid of is one day, my mother closing her eyes and me never having said thank you enough. Never letting her know that every loaf of bread she baked at 4 in the morning. I remember it. Daniel didn't speak while Sophie told her story. He just sat still, his whiskey-untouched fingers tapping softly against the stone. When she finished, he stayed silent for a long time, long enough that Sophie thought he might say nothing at all. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough, like these words had been locked in his throat for years and were only just now being let out. My father's name was Franklin. He built everything I'm running now, but he wasn't like me. He knew how to laugh. He knew how to hug my mother in the kitchen. He knew how to read to me every night. Daniel looked down at his hands, big hands marked with scars, resting on cold stone. I was 19 when he was shot, right in front of our house. A black car pulled up, 2 shots, then it drove away. My mother was at the second floor window. She saw everything. She ran downstairs and held my father on the sidewalk, his blood soaking into her dress. He died in her arms before the ambulance arrived. He stopped. Swallowed. My mother changed after that. She became someone else, hard, cold, controlling everything and everyone. She decided who came into the house, who could see me, what I ate, what I wore, who I married. Because she thought if she held everything tightly enough, nobody would die again. Nobody would get shot on the front steps again. Sophie watched him and began to understand. Elena, the mother, and law she had never met but had heard Daniel mention with a mix of respect and exhaustion, wasn't a monster. Elena was a woman who had held her husband as he died on a sidewalk and had never recovered, and that grief had turned her into a fortress. "And you?" Sophie asked softly. "Did you become someone else?" Daniel looked at her, and the smile that appeared then held no joy at all. Only the bitter irony of a man who could see himself clearly and hated what he saw. I became the man who rebuilt my father's empire using the same thing that killed him. The sentence dropped into the kitchen like a stone into a well, heavy, echoing, then swallowed by silence. Sophie didn't speak. She didn't try to comfort him. She didn't judge him. She just sat there with both hands around her tea, now gone cold, and let the silence exist between them without trying to fill it. Because sometimes silence is the only thing big enough to hold 2 people's pain. They sat like that for a long time. No words needed. 2 people carrying old wounds, losing a father at 15 and losing a father at 19. Seeing themselves in each other for the first time, not through the role of pretend spouses, not through Maya, not through an envelope of money, but through a pain that was strangely the same. The pain of children who lost their fathers too early and spent their lives trying to make up for the mothers left behind. Then Sophie drifted off, her head slowly lowered onto the kitchen island, her hands still wrapped around the mug, her light brown hair spilling onto cold stone. She was exhausted, because last night she had been up until 3 finishing Maya's birthday cake design, because that afternoon she had been pulled out of the park, because tonight she had learned she was being watched by men with guns, because for a whole week her body had been living in a state of tension. It was never built to carry. Daniel watched her sleep. He stood quietly without a sound. He went to his room, got his jacket, came back to the kitchen, and laid it over Sophie's shoulders. The jacket was too large for her, falling from her shoulders nearly to her elbows, smelling of cologne and leather. He stood there looking at her asleep on the island, hair loose, face peaceful, and he didn't touch her. He wanted to brush the strand of hair off her cheek. He wanted to carry her to a bed so she wouldn't sleep on cold stone. But he didn't, because he knew his hands weren't clean, and she deserved to be touched by cleaner hands than his. He only stood there, watched, then turned away, and in the sharp, bright kitchen light at 2 in the morning, he understood clearly and brutally. he didn't want her to leave. Not because of Maya, because of him. Day 7. 1 week since Sophie walked into this mansion, and she had started to forget the smell of flour in her bakery back home. In its place, she had grown used to the expensive fragrance in the hallways, used to the guards' radio chatter after midnight, used to the small footsteps of Meyer running down the stairs every morning to check that Sophie was still there. And that was the most frightening part, not the black sedan at the park, not the blood on his sleeve, but the familiarity, the way she was beginning to memorize this house, the way she knew Maya liked strawberry frosting more than chocolate, the way she knew Daniel drank black coffee with no sugar every morning at 6, the way she knew Marcus always stood watch in the corner of the kitchen during dinner, even though nobody told him he had to. She was putting down roots in a place she had no right to root into. That night, after Maya fell asleep, Sophie went down to the living room and found Daniel already there. 2 glasses of red wine on the table, one poured, one still empty. He looked at her, nudged the bottle toward the empty glass without saying a word, inviting her with nothing but his eyes. Sophie sat, poured herself some wine, and they drank in silence for a while, the living room lights soft, the velvet curtains drawn tight, the city at night glittering through a narrow gap. And for a moment, the room didn't feel cold anymore. But Sophie hadn't come down there to drink. Do you realize? She set her glass down and looked straight at Daniel. This morning Maya called me to braid her hair. At noon she pulled me into the playroom. This afternoon she asked what story I'd read tonight. Before bed she asked what we were baking tomorrow. Morning, Sophie paused. She's loving for real. Every day she gets a little more attached to me, trusts me a little more, opens up a little more, and every one of those little pieces when I leave will become a cut. Not one cut, dozens, because every good memory will turn into a painful memory when the person who made it disappears. Do you understand? Daniel set his glass down. He looked at Sophie, and what she saw in his eyes wasn't anger or defense. It was the exhaustion of a man who knew she was right and didn't want to face it. Then don't leave. He said it low and calm, like he was asking her to stay for dinner instead of asking her to change her entire life. Stay. Sophie didn't soften. She had expected this. She had known it would come because she had watched the way Daniel's gaze had changed over the past week. From the calculating look of someone weighing a piece on the board to the look of a man growing, used to a woman's presence in his home. No. Sophie's voice was clear, unshakable. If I stay, it has to be a real decision, a decision I make because I want to, not because of the envelope on the register counter that night, not because you're lonely in a $1 million mansion with 7 cameras and not a single family photograph on the walls. And certainly not because you're used to giving orders, and you think saying stay makes people stay. Daniel set his glass down harder than he meant to. The sound of glass on marble rang through the room. His jaw clenched, tendons rose in his neck, his gray eyes darkened. Sophie watched him fight the instinct to react the way he was built to react, the instinct to command, to control, to use power to keep what he wanted. But he didn't. He stayed still, looked at her, and when he spoke, there was something in his voice that came close to admiration. You've got guts? Sophie shook her head. No, I'm just someone with nothing left to lose. I came here with a small suitcase, a failing bakery, and a mother in a hospital bed. There's nothing you can take from me, and there's nothing you can offer me beyond what you already offered. So I can be honest with you, because the person with nothing left to lose is the freest. Silence. Long, the living room lights flickered faintly, maybe the wind rattling the power lines outside. Sophie looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Sophie, and the air between them shifted, not the sharp tension of the night of the blood-stained sleeve. A different kind of tension, the kind that happens when 2 people start to see each other more clearly than is safe. Daniel's hand rested on the table less than a palm's width from Sophie's, and she realized the distance was shrinking, not because either of them moved, but because the space between them was warming up, pulling them in. His fingers came close to hers, close enough she could feel the warmth radiating off his skin. Sophie drew her hand back. Gently but firmly, Not yet, not now, not while everything was still a performance, while she was still the hired one. While the line between real and fake was so blurred, she couldn't even tell which side she was standing on anymore. Sophie went back to her room, closed the door, sat on the bed, and picked up her phone. She tapped a video call to her mother. It took 6 rings, longer than usual, before the screen brightened and Helen appeared. Her mother lay in a hospital bed, head propped on pillows, and Roman IV line in her arm, skin paler than the last time Sophie had seen her. But her eyes were still bright, still sharp, still the kind of eyes that couldn't be lied to. "Sweetheart, it's been so long since you called. Mom, how are you feeling?" "I'm still here. That means I'm doing fine." Helen smiled, weak but warm. Then she studied the screen and frowned. "Where are you? That background isn't the bakery." Sophie angled the phone away from the velvet curtains and chandelier behind her. But it was too late. "I'm at a friend's place, helping watch a little one for a few weeks." "What friend? A new friend? I don't know her." Helen went quiet, watching her daughter through the screen, her gaze moving from Sophie's face to the blurred room behind her. And Sophie knew her mother was reading her, the way she had always been able to read her. Like a book she knew by heart, Helen didn't press. She only said, her voice gentle but every word landing clearly, "Sweetheart, I know you're hiding something. I don't know exactly what, but I trust you. I trust you won't do anything that harms you." Sophie bit her lip. "I promise, Mom. And remember, no matter what happens, you always have a home to come back to. It's a small bakery, but it's our home. I know, Mom. I love you." "I love you." She ended the call. Sophie sat on the bed staring at the dark screen and cried. She cried because she missed her mother, because she felt guilty for lying to her, because her mother was alone in a hospital while Sophie sat in a $1 million mansion drinking wine with a gang boss. She cried because her mother had said, "I trust you." And Sophie wasn't sure she deserved that trust. And she cried because the little girl upstairs was sleeping peacefully, because she believed Sophie would still be there in the morning. And her mother in the hospital believed her daughter was somewhere safe. 2 acts of faith, both of them wrong. Sophie lay in the unfamiliar room, staring up at the strange ceiling, thinking there were 5 days left. 5 days until she would leave, and the child sleeping across the hall would lose another mother. Sophie woke up at 2 in the morning on Maya's birthday. But the truth was she hadn't slept at all. After the call with her mother, after the tears, after the long night staring at the ceiling and counting down the days she had left. She slipped quietly into the kitchen and started baking. She had prepped the ingredients the day before, hiding them in the extra refrigerator the housekeeper rarely opened. Now she laid everything out across the kitchen island, like an artist preparing the most important work of her life. Flour, butter, sugar, heavy cream, food coloring, fondant, a silicone castle tower mold she had ordered online 3 days earlier. All week, every time Maya described her dream cake, Sophie had stored every detail, not on paper, in her mind. Every smallest thing, a 3-tier castle, pink towers, yellow frosting trimming the windows, tiny princesses standing around the base, a purple flag on the highest tower, because purple was Maya's favorite color, and a castle door that could open because Maya had said, "A castle has to have a door that opens so the princess can go inside." Sophie baked in the dark kitchen with only the small light above the stove hood turned on, kneading dough, whipping cream, shaping each detail with the kind of patience she had learned from her own mother through thousands of early mornings at the bakery. Helen used to tell her, good cake isn't good because the ingredients are expensive. Good cake is good because the baker pays attention to every single layer. And Sophie paid attention. She put her whole heart into that cake. Every fondant flour molded by hand, every line of frosting piped from the bag, every tiny princess placed around the base of the castle. By 4 in the morning, the cake had taken shape. By 5, she finished the last details, stepped back to look, and for the first time all week she smiled. Not because she was trying to, because she was proud. The cake was beautiful, more beautiful than any cake she had ever made at the bakery back home. Because this cake wasn't made to sell. It was made for a child she loved. At 6 in the morning, Sophie had just slid the cake into the large refrigerator when she heard small feet pounding down the hall. Fast and urgent, her bedroom door flew open. Maya rushed in, jumped onto the empty bed, then looked around in confusion when she didn't see Sophie. "Miss Sophie, I'm here." Sophie ran up from the kitchen, and Maya spun toward her, eyes shining, cheeks flushed, hair sticking up every direction, bunny pajamas twisted sideways. "I'm 4, Maya shouted, jumping down and hugging Sophie's leg. 4, I'm big now." Then she turned toward the hallway and called out, "Daddy, are you awake? I'm 4 now." Daniel appeared at the end of the hall, hair messy, eyes still heavy with sleep, wearing a T-shirt and pants. Looking nothing like the black-suited man of ordinary days, Maya ran to grab his hand, then grabbed Sophie's hand too, tugging them both toward her room. "Sit here, Daddy and Miss Sophie. Our family sits here." The 3 of them sat on Maya's bed. Maya in the middle, legs dangling, one hand holding her father and the other holding Sophie. And she laughed bright and full, laughing with her whole face and her whole body, the kind of laugh Sophie hadn't seen from her since the very first day. That moment felt so much like a real family it hurt. 3 people on a small bed, early Chicago sunlight filtering through the curtains. A child laughing between 2 adults. Anyone looking in would see a happy family starting a new day. But Sophie knew it was a performance. Daniel knew it was a performance, only Maya didn't, and that was why it hurt so much. At 9 in the morning, Sophie brought the cake out of the refrigerator and set it on the dining room table. She called Maya downstairs, and when the little girl ran into the room, she stopped short in the doorway. Maya's eyes went wide, her mouth fell open, her arms hung at her sides. The 3-tier castle cake stood at the center of the table. Pink towers glittering, yellow frosting outlining every tiny window, princess figures arranged around the base, the purple flag flying at the very top, and the castle door opened just enough to reveal a tiny princess inside, sitting on a throne. Brown hair, pink dress, looking like Maya. Maya didn't speak for 10 seconds. Then tears spilled, not sad tears. The kind that overflow when a heart receives exactly what it has ached for but never dared believe could be real. "This is the cake I dreamed," Maya whispered. "How did you know? How did you know I wanted pink towers? How did you know I wanted a purple flag? How did you know the castle door had to open?" Sophie knelt and smiled, even as her own eyes turned wet. "Because I listened every single time you told me." Maya lunged into Sophie's arms, small hands around her neck, face pressed into her shoulder, and said in a choked little voice, "You're the best person in the whole world." Behind them, Daniel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. His eyes were red even as he tried to look away. The party started at 2 in the afternoon. The mansion was decorated in pink and silver balloons, tinsel, and the Happy Birthday Maya banner Sophie and Maya had chosen on Michigan Avenue. Classmates arrived with parents, about 12 children running across the lawn, laughter everywhere. But mixed among the normal parents were a few different faces. 3 men in black suits, polite smiles, sharp eyes, always standing with their backs to the wall, always watching the doors, giving themselves away as not parents at all. Daniel's associates, coming to wish their boss's daughter a happy birthday. And Sophie realized that even a child's birthday party wasn't free of the shadow that followed this family. That Daniel's world had no days off, no empty spaces where darkness couldn't slip in. Maya didn't notice. She was radiant with happiness, racing from one game to the next, dragging her friends over to show off the castle cake, shouting Miss Sophie made it, to anyone who would listen. Sophie ran the games, painted faces into butterflies and superheroes and princesses. She did it naturally because she had studied early childhood education for 3 years, because she loved children, because this was work she had been born to do, even if life had dragged her somewhere else. But amid the laughter and balloons, Sophie noticed something no one else saw. Every few minutes, Maya would turn her head to look for her. In the middle of playing, Maya would pause, eyes sweeping the room until she found Sophie, and only then would she go back to playing. Like she was checking, counting each minute Sophie was still there, afraid that if she didn't look, Sophie would disappear. A mother standing next to Sophie while the children ate cake leaned in and whispered, "Maya has changed so much. Last year at her birthday party, she sat in a corner and didn't play with anyone. Didn't talk, didn't smile. I was worried something was really wrong. But look at her today, laughing, running everywhere. What did you do? How are you so good with her?" Sophie smiled. I just listened to her, and as she said it, she looked at Maya laughing among her friends. Her heart felt full and shattered at the same time. Because she knew she had brought this change into Maya's life, and she would be the one to take it away. Then it was time to blow out the candles. The 3-tier castle cake was placed at the center of the table. 4 pink candles set into the highest tower, flames flickering. Everyone sang happy birthday. Maya stood in front of the cake. Eyes squeezed shut, hands clasped at her chest, lips moving as she made her wish. The whole room went quiet, waiting. Then Maya opened her eyes, drew in a deep breath, blew out all 4 candles, and shouted in a voice that rang through the entire room, "I wish Sophie stays forever." The room went silent. Maya's shout echoed through the space, and then fell into a stillness so thick it felt like honey. The parents glanced at one another and smiled, assuming it was just the sweet kind of thing children say. A mother cooed, "Oh, that's adorable." A dad laughed and clapped, but Sophie didn't smile, and neither did Daniel. They looked at each other across a room full of balloons and tinsel, and in both their eyes was the same thing. Panic, because they knew what the other parents didn't, that this wish wasn't a cute little line. It was a cry for help. Maya spoke again, louder now, almost shouting, both hands gripping the edge of the table. "Forever. She can't ever go. Never." And Sophie looked into Maya's eyes then. Really looked, and she saw it. Those big brown eyes weren't full of joy. They were full of fear, fear disguised as a wish. The fear of being abandoned again, dressed up as hope. Maya was using her birthday candles like a last life raft. Like wishing hard enough, loud enough, enough times could make it real. Could keep Sophie from disappearing. Maya had blown out the candles, but her eyes never left Sophie, tracking her through the thin smoke rising from the 4 extinguished wicks. Like she was afraid that if she blinked, Sophie would be gone. Then a woman's voice cut through the air. My granddaughter, Eleanor Hargrove, stood in the dining room doorway. Nobody knew when she had arrived. She was tall and thin, posture perfectly straight, silver hair cut short and precise, a perfectly tailored dark gray suit. A simple pearl necklace that still carried an authority money couldn't buy. Her face was beautiful in a cold way. High cheekbones, thin lips, gray eyes exactly like Daniel's, but sharper, colder, and beneath them were dark circles no expensive makeup could truly hide. She looked at Maya, she looked at the castle cake, she looked at the balloons and tinsel, then she looked at Sophie. And the way her gaze stopped on Sophie was like a scalpel, precise and cold, cutting through every outer layer to see straight inside. Her face went pale, not with fear, with anger. The party slowly dissolved. Parents led their children away, kids clutching favor bags. The mansion grounds fell quiet again, but Eleanor didn't leave. She sat in the living room, legs crossed, back straight, a cup of tea in front of her untouched, and she waited. She waited until the last child left, until Sophie took Maya upstairs to change, and then she spoke. "Sit down." She said it to Sophie in a voice that wasn't loud, but nobody would dare disobey it. Sophie sat. Eleanor looked her over from head to toe, slowly, like she was checking merchandise before deciding whether to return it. Sophie Bennett, 27, owner of a small bakery, mother with stage 3 cancer, dropped out of college in your 3rd year. Sophie went stiff. Eleanor knew everything, of course she did. She was Eleanor Hargrove, mother of the most powerful boss in Chicago. If Marcus had a file on Sophie, Eleanor certainly had one too, probably with more detail, a bakery. Eleanor took a sip of tea, set the cup down, porcelain touching saucer with a sound that was soft but sharp. "My son runs an empire, and the girl he chooses to bring into his house sells cookies. Not a question. A verdict Sophie wanted to answer, but before she could open her mouth, Elinor stood, turned her back, and walked toward Daniel's office. I need to speak with my son alone. The office door closed. Sophie sat alone in the living room, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. Inside the office, Elinor stood in front of Daniel, and for the first time, her steel shell cracked. Your father died in front of me. Her voice shook the kind of tremor impossible to imagine in the woman who had sat out there a moment ago. Right on the front steps of this house, on the sidewalk you walk past every day. I held your father in my arms, blood soaking into my dress, and he closed his eyes before I could even say goodbye. Because of this world, the world your father built, and you keep alive. Elinor stepped forward and placed her hand on Daniel's desk. Claire ran because she was afraid. She had every reason to be afraid. I don't blame her. Any woman with sense would run from this house. Now you bring in an ordinary girl, a bakery girl with no powerful family, no connections, no one to protect her. And when she learns the full truth, when she sees blood on your sleeve, when she understands she's living in a war zone, she'll run too. Just like Claire and Maya will lose another mother. Elinor opened her purse, pulled out a thick envelope of documents, and set it on the desk. I checked. There's no marriage license between you and Sophie Bennett. Not anywhere. She was working at the bakery right up until 4 days before she appeared in your house. It's all fake. I don't know how much you're paying her, but I know this is a performance. Daniel stayed silent, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the thick envelope without opening it. Elinor wasn't finished. She lowered her voice. And now it wasn't cold. It was heavy. Heavy with the real fear of a woman who had lost her husband and was terrified of losing her grandchild. Victor Reyes is watching you. I have my own sources. His men have been seen near your house, near Maya's school, near the park where you let that girl take my granddaughter with only one guard. He used that exact same play on Claire. Surveillance, photos, threats, until she broke and ran. Do you want history to repeat itself? Daniel still didn't speak. Elinor stepped closer, her voice dropping almost to a whisper, but every word carved cleanly as stone. That girl has to go today. She can never see Maya again, or I will use everything I have, and you know what I have, to take Maya out of this house. Elinor left the mansion 10 minutes after the conversation in the office, her black car gliding through the iron gate and vanishing into the night. But her threat stayed behind, heavy and thick, settling over the house like ash after a fire. Daniel stayed in his office for another half-hour alone. When he finally opened the door and stepped out, his face was nothing like the face he had carried in. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the cold mask of a boss. It was the face of a man driven to a wall with nowhere left to go. He found Sophie in the living room. She had been sitting there since Elinor ordered her out, hands resting on her thighs, spine straight, waiting for what she knew was coming, not knowing how much it would hurt. Daniel sat across from her and told her. He told her everything, without hiding anything, without choosing what to keep back, without soft wrapping. He told her about Elinor, about the thick envelope of documents proving the whole thing was fake, about the threat to take Maya out of the house if Sophie didn't leave immediately. He told her about Victor Reyes, about Elinor's sources confirming Victor's men were watching the mansion, about the real danger Sophie faced every day she stayed here. Then he told her what he had never told anyone except Marcus, what he had been carrying in his chest for 3.5 years like a bullet that couldn't be removed. Claire didn't simply leave. His voice was low and slow, like every word had its own weight, and he had to push each one out. She was threatened. Victor sent her a photo of Maya in a stroller at the park with a message, "Leave or the baby pays for it." She didn't tell me. She knew that if she did, I would answer with war. And war would put Maya in the middle, so she decided on her own. She left to protect our daughter. Sophie sat perfectly still, and she felt the room tilt. Not dizziness, but the sensation of everything she thought she knew about this story being flipped upside down. Maya thinks her mother left because she didn't love her. She thinks she was the reason her mother went away, but the truth is her mother left because she loved her, Daniel nodded, and that small motion looked like it drained the last of his strength. And I haven't told Maya, because if I tell her the truth, if I explain that her mother was threatened by my enemy, that she had to run because my world is too dangerous, then my daughter will know what kind of man her father really is. She'll understand it wasn't her mother abandoning her. It was her father driving her mother away with the life I chose. He looked at Sophie, and she saw him then, not as the boss, not as Daniel Hargrove the whole city feared, but as a father being crushed by the consequences of his own choices, carrying a brutal secret to protect the only image his daughter still had of him, the image of the strongest man in the world, when the truth was, he was the source of every loss. I'm telling you because you deserve to know, because you've been here for nearly 10 days. You've given my daughter more than anyone has since Claire left, and you have a right to know why you should be afraid. Sophie looked at him, and in her mind, the pieces clicked together into a complete picture. The black sedan at the park, the cameras everywhere, Marcus always close, the office door always locked. Maya's nightmares about bad people and her father fighting. None of it was the caution of a rich man. It was the defense of someone living in a war zone. And she, Sophie Bennett, the bakery girl from down the road, was standing in the middle of that war zone with the 3-year-old child she loved. Silenced, Sophie looked down at her hands, fingertips still dusted with fondant from the castle cake that morning. She thought of Maya, of the birthday wish shouted across the room, of the big brown eyes that hadn't left her for even a minute. Then she lifted her head, looked Daniel straight in the face, and spoke in a calm voice that surprised even herself. I'll go. Daniel closed his eyes, not because your mother is forcing it. Elinor can threaten whatever she wants. I'm not afraid of her. Sophie paused. I'm leaving because every day I stay, I love Maya more, and Maya loves me more. Every morning she checks that I'm still here. Every night she brings me a brush and asks me to braid her hair. Every day she says my name one more time, and each time is another thread tying us together. When I leave, every thread becomes a cut. And if I stay another week, another 2 weeks, another month, those cuts will be so deep she'll never fully heal. She stood. Give me one last day, tomorrow. Let me be with Maya one more day without crying in front of her. One last day. Sophie woke to Maya jumping onto the bed, hair wild, eyes bright. What are we doing today? Sophie smiled. The most painful smile of her life. We're going out. All that day, Sophie pretended everything was normal. Pretended so well she almost believed it herself. They ate breakfast. They made heart-shaped cookies. Maya got flour all over her nose and giggled. But in the middle of laughing, Maya suddenly stopped and tilted her head, looking at Sophie with eyes too old for her age. Are you sad? Sophie swallowed. No. Why do you think that? Your mouth is smiling, but your eyes are sad, I can tell. A 3-year-old looking straight through a mask the whole adult world would have missed. Sophie knelt and kissed Maya's forehead. I'm just a little tired, that's all. Want to go to the park this afternoon. That afternoon, Marcus drove them to the park. This time, there were 2 security vehicles following, after the black sedan incident. Sophie and Maya sat in the grass picking dandelions. And Sophie taught Maya how to weave a flower crown, small, clumsy fingers threading the stems together, tongue sticking out in concentration. When the crown was finished, crooked and loose, but the very first one Maya had ever made herself, she placed it on Sophie's head. Flower Queen, Maya shouted, laughing. Sophie laughed too, but tears hovered behind her lashes. She tried not to blink because she was afraid they would fall. She held Maya, held her tight, memorizing everything, the strawberry shampoo in Maya's hair, the weight of a tiny hug that squeezed the air out of her, the sound of laughter drifting through the Chicago afternoon, the warmth of a small hand holding hers. She memorized it all, because after today, memory was the only thing she would be allowed to take with her. Miss Sophie, yes, sweetheart, I love you too. Maya lifted her face, eyes bright, and asked in a soft, hopeful voice, like she was asking the most obvious thing in the world, then you're staying, right? Sophie didn't answer. She couldn't because any word she spoke would be a lie or a blade. Zoe looked at her, waited, and then those big brown eyes slowly changed. The light in them faded like a candle running out of wick. She understood. She read the answer in Sophie's silence the same way she had read the sadness in her eyes that morning. Because this child had learned how to read adults long before she ever learned to read words, Maya was silent the entire drive back. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She only sat in the back seat, turned toward the window, arms tight around her stuffed bear. And that silence was more frightening than any question, because it was the silence of a child who already knew the ending, and no longer had the strength to beg, "Night." The mansion was silent. Maya had fallen asleep after the long day, exhausted from playing and from a sadness she could feel but couldn't name. Sophie closed her bedroom door, pulled her small suitcase out from under the bed, the same one she had brought here 10 days ago with a few changes of clothes and a box of heart-shaped cookies. She opened it and began to pack. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, not from fear, but because her body knew what her mind had decided hours ago. She was leaving a child she loved. She folded a tiche, and placed it in the suitcase, then folded the next one. And the first tear dropped onto the fabric, spreading into a dark round stain on the white cotton. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and kept folding. But the tears kept falling onto the clothes, onto the rim of the suitcase, falling soundlessly because she was biting down on her lip so she wouldn't sob out loud and wake Maya. But Maya heard anyway, not the crying, the sound of the zipper. Sophie's door opened, soft and slow. And when Sophie turned around, Maya was standing there, tiny in her bunny pajamas, clutching her worn stuffed bear. Hair tousled, eyes heavy with sleep, but those big brown eyes were fixed on the suitcase on the bed, on the neatly folded clothes inside, on Sophie's shoes lined up by the door, and she understood immediately, with the instinct of a child who had seen this once before, when her mother packed a suitcase in the middle of the night and disappeared before morning. "Are you leaving?" Maya's voice was as small as a breath, so small Sophie almost didn't hear it. Small because the child was using every last bit of strength to keep her voice from breaking. "Tomorrow, I have to leave tomorrow." Maya's face crumpled, not slowly, in an instant, like a wall that had been holding too much weight for too long, finally collapsing. Her mouth trembled, her chin shook, her eyes reddened, her whole small face twisting as she tried to hold it in. "And what did I do wrong?" Maya's voice broke, tears spilling. "Tell me what I did wrong. I'll be better. I promise. I won't break eggs anymore. I won't have nightmares anymore. I won't ask anyone to braid my hair anymore. I promise I'll be good. Please." Sophie went rigid. Every sentence Maya said was a blade cutting straight into her chest, not just because it hurt, but because it showed what this 3-year-old actually believed, that grown-ups leave because the child is at fault. That if she is better, quieter, less trouble, then her mother will stay. "You didn't do anything wrong, Maya. Listen to me. You never did anything wrong." "Then why?" Maya screamed. The sound tearing through the mansion's silence, echoing down the hallway, echoing to the floor below. She threw herself at Sophie, small arms locking around Sophie's legs, face pressed into Sophie's knees. Her whole body shaking. "Don't leave like the other mom. Please, Miss Sophie. Please don't go." She cried until she couldn't breathe. Short, fast, broken gasps, the kind of crying children do when they are so scared their bodies can't control it anymore. Heavy footsteps pounded on the stairs. Daniel ran to the doorway and froze at the sight of his daughter clinging to Sophie's legs and crying like the world was ending. He stepped forward and dropped to his knees. "Maya, sweetheart, calm down." But Maya wouldn't let go. She held tighter, small fingers digging into Sophie's pant leg until her knuckles turned white. "If I let go, you'll disappear, like the other mom. The other mom left when I was asleep. If I don't let go, then you can't go." Sophie knelt and gently unfolded each of Maya's fingers from her leg. Each one she loosened felt like pulling it off her own heart. She gathered Maya into her arms, and the little girl curled into her and sobbed into Sophie's chest, trembling all over. Why do all the moms leave me? That question. The same one Maya had asked her father in the car that very first day. And now she asked it again, but worse, because the first time she asked because she didn't understand. This time she asked because she understood far too well. Sophie looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Sophie. And Sophie decided to tell the truth. Maya, listen to me. Your dad asked me to come here and pretend to be your mom, like a game, so you could have a mom at your birthday party. Maya stopped crying, not because the pain eased, but because shock took her breath. She lifted her face, eyes drenched, and stared at Sophie. Pretend, but the love is real. The love I feel for you is real. Every time I braided your hair, every cake I made for you, every night I held you while you slept, all of it was real. Maya blinked, then she turned and looked at her father, those big brown eyes fixed on him with a look Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. You lied to me. Daniel nodded. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He didn't say, I did it for you. He only nodded. Because any more words would have insulted his daughter's pain, Maya stepped back out of Sophie's arms, back away from her father, back until her small shoulders hit the wall. Her face changed. Tears still ran, but her mouth pressed into a hard line. Her hands clenched around her stuffed bear, and the glassy pleading stare that had been begging a moment ago now burned with anger, raw and pure and brutal. The anger of a child who had just learned the two people she trusted most in the world had both lied to her. I hate both of you, Maya screamed, her voice hoarse from crying. Then she turned and ran into her room, slamming the door so hard the hallway picture frames shook. Zoe, please let me explain. Go away. You're just acting. You're such a good actor. Go away. Maya's voice came from behind the door, mixed with strangled sobs, the thud of a stuffed bear thrown against the wall, the clatter of something knocked over. Sophie rested her forehead against the wooden door, tears sliding down her face. She knew she couldn't open that door anymore, even though the little plastic key was still in her pocket. 15 minutes later, Sophie dragged her suitcase to the front door. Marcus was already waiting by the SUV. No one had told him, but he knew, because Marcus always knew. Sophie crossed the foyer, crossed the living room where she had once drunk red wine with Daniel, crossed the kitchen where she and Maya had cracked eggs and made pancakes, crossed every memory from 10 short days that felt as long as a lifetime, and she didn't look back, because if she did, she wouldn't be able to keep walking. Marcus opened the car door. Sophie climbed into the back seat. The door shut. The vehicle rolled forward. The iron gate opened and then closed behind them, and Sophie shattered. She cried not silently like before, but out loud with her whole body. Shoulders shaking, hands gripping her bag, face pressed to the cold window glass. Marcus drove through the city night, glanced in the rearview mirror, saw the 27-year-old bakery girl sobbing in the back of his car, and for the first time in his hardened life, he didn't know what to say. So he just drove slowly, through street after street toward home, giving her a little more time before she had to step out and face a life without Maya. Back in the Lincoln Park mansion, Daniel sat on the floor of Maya's room. Maya had cried herself into exhaustion and lay curled on her bed, eyes swollen, still clutching her stuffed bear, her breathing still hitching softly even as she slept. Daniel held his daughter, pressed his cheek to the top of her head, and looked down at the floor. The discarded yellow plastic key lay tossed under the bed. Maya had thrown it away. And beside that key, the drawing with 3 stick people, the woman in the purple dress and red shoes that Maya had once dreamed of, had been torn clean in half. On the first day after Sophie left, Maya didn't cry. She woke up, looked at the empty guest room, looked at the closet that was now bare, looked at the kitchen island with no trace of flour in the air. Then she sat down in the corner of her room, hugged her stuffed bear, and said nothing, not one word. Daniel called her down for breakfast. Maya didn't answer. He carried her to the kitchen, set a plate of pancakes in front of her that the housekeeper had made. But the housekeeper's pancakes weren't like Sophie's. There was no smiling face drawn in frosting, no laughter while flipping them, no familiar smell. Maya stared at the plate and turned her head away. On the second day, the third, the fourth, the fifth, Maya still didn't speak. She moved through the mansion like a small shadow, eyes empty. Not crying, not smiling, not asking, not wanting. She started wetting the bed. Something Daniel thought she had stopped doing more than a year ago. She started sucking her thumb. A habit the doctor had said was a sign that a child was going backward emotionally because the present was too much to bear. Every night, Daniel went to her room and found Maya sitting on the bed staring at the wall. Not out the window, not at her toys, not at anything at all. Just at the white wall in front of her, with eyes he didn't recognize. Eyes that had gone dark, eyes that had lost the light. He knelt in front of her, reached for her hand. But Maya pulled away, not angry, worse than angry, indifferent. A child who had pulled every single feeling inward. Shut every door, locked every lock, even the little plastic lock she had already thrown away. On the fifth day, Daniel sat beside her bed and tried to read the princess story, the worn book he had been reading to her every night. But Maya turned her face to the wall and spoke her first words after 5 days of silence. I don't need a mom anymore. I don't need anyone. Maya's voice was even and flat, without emotion, the voice of a 4-year-old who had decided to stop hoping, because hope only led to pain. Daniel sat there staring at his daughter's back, and he understood. He wasn't losing her to death or to an enemy. He was losing her to life, to the way she was disconnecting from the world, building a wall inside herself. At an age when the only thing she should have been worrying about was which doll wore which dress. The second week was worse. Maya began refusing to eat, not skipping meals because she wasn't hungry, refusing, pushing the plate away, turning her face aside, clamping her mouth shut when the housekeeper tried to feed her. Her small body, already slight, began thinning visibly. Hollow cheeks, smaller arms and legs, her collarbones rising under the bunny pajamas. On the 10th day, Daniel called a doctor to the house. The doctor examined Maya, checked her heart rate, looked into her eyes, pinched her skin to test for dehydration. Then pulled Daniel into the hallway. She's severely dehydrated and exhausted. She needs fluids immediately. Physically, we can treat that, but the problem isn't physical. The doctor looked at Daniel in a way that needed no further explanation. You're her father. You're supposed to know where the real problem is. The Roman 4 needle went into Maya's tiny hand. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She only watched the needle pierce her skin with blank eyes. As if physical pain was nothing at all compared to what was hurting inside. Eleanor came to see her granddaughter that afternoon. She stepped into Maya's room, perfect as always, posture straight, chin high. But when she saw her granddaughter lying on the bed, thin, eyes sunken, the Roman 4 in her hand, the clear tubing running from that tiny arm to the fluid bag hanging above, Eleanor froze. Her legs buckled. Eleanor Hargrove, the woman who controlled everything, the woman who had watched her husband die and still stayed standing, the woman who had ordered Sophie out without a single tremor in her voice, dropped to her knees beside the bed. She placed her hand over Maya's other hand, the one without the needle, and cried for the first time. Tears ran down her cheeks, through her makeup, down onto her pearls, and she whispered in a shattered voice Daniel had never once heard from her. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Maya didn't react. She looked at her grandmother with empty eyes, not angry, not forgiving, nothing at all. Eleanor stood, pulled Daniel into the hallway, gripped her son's hand, and said in the kind of voice she hadn't used since the day his father died, Bring her back. I was wrong. Bring her back before I lose my granddaughter. At the same time, at the bakery, Sophie was living in her own private kind of hell. She returned to the shop the morning after she left the mansion, unlocked the door, turned on the ovens, kneaded dough, did everything the way Habet had taught her over 10 years. But her hands shook. She forgot to add salt. She forgot a tray in the oven until the smell of burning hit her. She yanked the door open and found the pastries completely blackened. She stood staring at the ruined tray and broke down crying in the middle of the kitchen. Crying out of control, while Aunt Carol ran in and held her without understanding what had happened. At night, Sophie couldn't sleep. She lay in the small room behind the bakery, staring at the low ceiling, and missed Maya. Missed the laughter when they cracked eggs, missed the strawberry shampoo, missed the words, "You're the best person in the world." Missed the little plastic key she still carried in her coat pocket. She lost weight. Dark circles deepened under her eyes. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't pipe frosting in a straight line. On the 12th day, Sophie went to the hospital to see her mother. Helen lay in bed, weaker than during their last video call. Skin so pale and thin the blue veins showed beneath, but her eyes were still sharp, still bright, still the kind of eyes nobody could hide anything from. Helen watched her daughter walk into the room, hollow-eyed, thinner, eyes swollen from crying, and she didn't ask, "Are you okay?" because she already knew the answer. She only said, "Tell me the truth." Sophie sat in the chair beside the bed, took her mother's hand, and told her everything. From the night Daniel knocked on the bakery door, the envelope of cash, the cold mansion, Meyer, and the drawing with 3 stick people. The heart cookies, the plastic key, Elinor, Victor Ray's, the blood on the sleeve, the last night when Maya clung to her legs and screamed, "Don't leave," like the other mom. She told it all. Without hiding, without filtering, and when she finished, Sophie cried in front of her mother for the first time since her father died. Helen was quiet for a long time. She held Sophie's hand, her own fingers thin and weak, but gripping tight. Then she spoke, slow, each word carrying the weight of someone who knows she has little time left, and that every sentence must matter. "I'm going to die, I know it, I've accepted it. I've lived long enough to raise you, to see you become a good person, and I'm grateful for every day." She paused, breathing, the oxygen tubing trembling softly. "What I won't accept is you living in guilt, you leaving behind a child you love to take care of me, and then, after I'm gone, carrying that regret for the rest of your life. I can't bear that." Sophie tightened her grip on her mother's hand. "I needed the money for your treatment. If I go back, if I leave the bakery, I won't have income. I won't be able to pay the hospital bills. I'll die." Helen smiled, tired, but calm in a way that was almost frightening. "Sweetheart, I'm going to die whether we have money or not. Stage 3 cancer doesn't ask for your bank balance. Money only buys more time. And what does that time mean if my daughter is miserable?" Because of it, Sophie's phone buzzed at 6 in the morning on the 14th day. She was sitting in the bakery kitchen, a tray of cookies in front of her. Cookies she had baked at 4 in the morning because she couldn't sleep. 4 in the morning, the way her mother used to get up to knead dough every single day. Only, unlike her mother, Sophie wasn't baking to sell. She was baking so her hands would have something to do instead of shaking. She glanced at the screen, an unknown number, but when she picked up, the voice on the other end wasn't unknown. "Miss Bennett," Marcus, his voice low, steady, as emotionless as always. But there was something else in it. Something Sophie had never heard from that hardened man. Something close to helplessness. "I'm calling, not because my boss told me to. He doesn't know I'm calling." A brief pause. "She hasn't eaten for 5 days. The doctor gave her fluids, but she pulled the needle out herself. 3 times we had to tape it back down. She won't talk to anyone. Not her father, not her grandmother, not me. She sits and stares at the wall from morning to night." Marcus stopped, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, almost a whisper. "I've been with him for 15 years. I've seen things worse than death, but I've never seen anything worse than her eyes right now. She looks, and she doesn't see anything. Like the lights went out." He hung up. No more words, no pleading, no suggestion. Marcus had only delivered the truth and left Sophie to decide. Because he understood this decision had to be hers, not anyone else's, Sophie set the phone down. She sat in the empty bakery. The yellow light spilling over the old wooden tables her mother had wiped down every night for 20 years. She looked at the photograph on the wall, Helen, young and smiling beside the pastry case, and she heard her mother's voice again from yesterday afternoon on the hospital bed. "I don't need you to sacrifice your happiness just to keep me alive a few more months. That little girl needs you, And you need her. Helen had added, her voice weak but every word razor clear. You think you're sacrificing yourself for me, but the truth is you're hiding. You're hiding because you're afraid. Afraid to love and then lose, afraid to step into that child's life and then have to leave again. But sweetheart, I spent my whole life afraid. Afraid I couldn't raise you. Afraid the bakery would collapse. Afraid of 100 things, and I still stayed because love isn't the absence of fear. Love is being afraid and staying anyway. Sophie stood up. She stood in the middle of the bakery, the place her parents had built with their own hands, the place she had grown up in the smell of melting butter, the place she had chosen to come back to in order to save her mother, and now she was standing here, safe, familiar, and suffocatingly empty, because somewhere else a 4-year old was pulling out Roman 4 needles and staring at a wall with eyes that had gone dark. She picked up her phone. She called Daniel. He answered after the first ring, like he had been holding the phone. Waiting for something he didn't dare hope for. I'm coming back. Sophie's voice didn't shake. Didn't hesitate. She had hesitated enough through the 14 days of hell behind her. Not for money. You can keep that envelope. Not because you called, because you didn't call. Not out of guilt or pity. I'm coming back because I'm choosing Maya, because I promised myself I won't be the next adult who abandons her. Silence on the other end. Sophie could hear Daniel breathing, heavy, uneven, like he was forcing something down in his throat. Then he spoke, his voice rough. This time I won't let anyone threaten you. Not Alina, not Victor, not anyone. I don't need you to protect me. I need you to be honest with me, with Maya, with yourself. No more fake scripts, no more non-disclosure agreements. No more envelopes. If I come back, I'm coming back with the truth, and you'll have to live with that truth. Okay, one word, but Sophie heard more than agreement in it. She heard surrender, the surrender of a man who was used to controlling everything, finally accepting there was something he couldn't control. And that something was a 27-year-old bakery girl calling him at 6 a.m. and saying, I choose, instead of I agree. That afternoon, Daniel drove Maya to Sophie's neighborhood. Not in the usual black SUV. He drove an ordinary car, no escort, just Marcus in the front seat. Maya sat in the back. Thin, pale, eyes sunken. Her stuffed bear clutched to her chest, staring out the window with eyes that didn't take anything in. She didn't ask where they were going. She had stopped asking anything days ago. The car stopped in front of the bakery. Daniel opened the door, lifted Maya out, and guided her inside. The wind chime over the door rang softly, and the smell of butter and vanilla rolled out. Maya looked up. Sophie stood behind the register, white apron on, hair tied back in a ponytail, eyes swollen but fixed on Maya. Maya froze, her whole body went rigid, both hands tightening around the bear, eyes widening, and for the first time in 2 weeks, her face showed something. But it wasn't joy, it was fear, pure fear, the fear of a child who had been tricked once and no longer dared to believe. You'll leave again. Maya's voice was small, hoarse from days without speaking. You'll come back and then you'll go again, like last time. Sophie stepped out from behind the counter. She knelt on the bakery's tile floor, lowered herself to Maya's eye level, exactly the way she had knelt the very first time, in the mansion living room with the box of heart-shaped cookies. You have every right to be mad at me. You have every right not to trust me. I deserve your anger because I promised with my actions and then I left. But this time, Maya, this time it's real. I'm not here because your dad paid me. I'm not here because anyone forced me. I'm here because I'm choosing you. Maya stared at Sophie. Those big brown eyes still afraid, still doubtful, but underneath the fear, something stirred. Something Sophie had thought had died. But it had only been hiding, waiting, testing whether it was safe to come out again. I love you, Maya whispered. But I'm mad at you too, both at the same time. I don't know how. Sophie smiled, tears running down her face.
But the smile was real. I can take both. You can love me and be mad at me at the same time. I'm here to hold both. Maya stood still for a moment.
Then she took one step forward, then another. Then she rushed into Sophie's arms. not the frantic clinging hug from the night by the suitcase, but a trembling, fragile, gentle hug. The hug of a child choosing to believe one more time, even though she knows it might hurt. Sophie wrapped her arms around Maya, felt how much lighter she was, thinner, all bone compared to 2 weeks ago, and she held her tight, like she could make up for every day she hadn't been there just by the strength of her arms now. Then Sophie reached behind the counter and took out the familiar paper box. She opened it. Inside were heart-shaped cookies, pale pink frosting, dusted with powdered sugar, the same as the very first ones she had brought to the mansion the day Maya met her. Maya looked at them. She took one, bit into it, chewed slowly, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Still good. She said it with her mouth full of cookie, tears dropping onto the pink frosting, and with her other hand she took Sophie's hand. The hand was small, thinner than before, but it held tight. It didn't let go. Sophie moved into the mansion that afternoon. But this time she didn't bring a small suitcase the way she had the first time. She brought 2 suitcases. One filled with clothes, and one filled with her mother's baking tools, the heart-shaped molds, the oak rolling pin Helen had used since the day she opened the shop, the old apron embroidered with the name Bennett, its thread faded with years. She brought those things because this time she wasn't coming to stay temporarily. She was coming to stay, and she wanted this cold, echoing mansion to smell like butter and flour, to carry the warmth of that little bakery in her neighborhood, to hold a piece of Helen in the kitchen where she would cook for Meyer every day. She had barely set her suitcases down in the room when she heard a car pull up outside the gate. Elinor had arrived. Sophie braced for a confrontation, for the icy stare and the threats, but the woman who stepped through the front door wasn't the Elinor Sophie had met before. Elinor was still dressed to perfection, still wearing her pearl necklace, still holding her back straight and her chin high. But something in her eyes had broken and been mended with a different kind of glue, the kind made from the image of her granddaughter lying there within Roman 4. Those empty eyes, a memory she would never be able to erase. Elinor looked at Sophie, looked at the 2 suitcases, looked at the baking tools laid out on the kitchen island, and for a long moment she said nothing at all. Then she sat down in the living room chair, not upright and controlled the way she had before, but heavily, like someone carrying a weight too large to set down. I lost my husband to this world. Elinor's voice was low, not trembling, not cold, hovering in the space where real feeling lives. Franklin died right in front of my house. I held him in my arms, his blood soaked into my skin, and from that day on, I swore I would never let anyone in my family get hurt again. I controlled everything. I pushed everyone out. I thought if I held tight enough, we'd all be safe. She looked down at her hands, diamond rings flashing on fingers that trembled just slightly. Then I saw Maya lying in that bed, so thin I could count her ribs through her nightgown, looking at me without seeing me, and I understood that I, the one who wanted to protect her the most, was the one who had nearly killed her. She paused. I'm afraid of losing her. I'm still afraid. Sophie sat across from Elinor and looked at her with eyes that weren't afraid anymore, and weren't angry either, because she had understood Elinor ever since that night. Daniel talked about his father dying on the sidewalk, and the wife who had held her husband in her arms. Elinor wasn't a monster. She was a woman whose grief had turned her into a fortress, and that fortress had trapped the very people she loved most. Maya doesn't need another protector. She's got a father. She's got Uncle Marcus. She's got iron gates and cameras and bodyguards. What she's missing is something nobody in this house has been able to give her. She needs someone to love her, the kind of love that braids her hair every morning, the kind that cracks eggs and makes a mess and laughs, the kind that holds her in the middle of night when a nightmare comes. Elinor watched Sophie, her head tilted slightly, those sharp gray eyes weighing her in a new way. Not measuring an enemy, measuring a possible ally. Can you live in this world? You know what this world is now. Blood on a sleeve, secrets behind locked doors, enemies watching. Can you look at those things every day and still stay? Sophie didn't hesitate. I didn't choose Daniel's world. I chose Maya. Whatever comes with it, I'll learn how to live in it, because she's lived in it for 4 years without anyone holding her hand."
Elinor fell silent for a long time. Then she nodded, a small nod, not warm, not open, but carrying something Sophie recognized as respect.
The kind of respect Elinor gave to very few people. "If you leave again, I won't forgive you." Her voice was even, her gaze steady. It wasn't a threat. Sophie understood. It was a promise, from a grandmother who had knelt and wept beside her granddaughter's bed for the first time in her life, who had seen the consequences of her own choices, who would not allow it to happen again, no matter what it cost. Elinor stood, smoothed her jacket, gathered her authority back around her like a cloak, and walked toward the door. Before she left, she stopped, didn't turn around, and added one more sentence. "The birthday cake was beautiful. My granddaughter deserved a cake like that." Then she was gone. Sophie watched the black car disappear beyond the gate and understood that was the only praise Elinor Hargrove would give her for a long time. But it was enough. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Sophie found a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma, and Maya began seeing her twice a week. There were good days, days when Maya laughed, baked, let Sophie braid her hair. But there were bad days too. Bad days that arrived without any warning, like a storm breaking open under a sunny sky. One afternoon, Sophie was cleaning the kitchen, after the two of them had made cookies, when Maya suddenly stopped. Her face flushed, her hand clenched tight around a mold, and she screamed, "You're not my real mom. You're just someone Dad hired. My real mom left me. You'll leave too." Then she threw the mold onto the floor, ran into her room, and slammed the door. Sophie stood in the kitchen with flour on her apron, the baking mold rolling near her feet, and she took a deep breath. She didn't chase after Maya, didn't knock right away. She waited. The therapist had warned her, when Maya explodes, give her space. Don't force it. Don't answer with your own emotions. Let her learn that anger won't make adults leave. Sophie waited 10 minutes. Then she went to Maya's door and knocked softly. "Maya, I'm out here." Silence inside. "You're right, legally I'm not your mother yet. I wasn't there from the first day. I came later. I came too late and I left once." Silence. But Sophie could hear breathing on the other side of the door, Maya sitting close, listening. "But I want to be your mom, not because anyone hired me, not because anyone forced me, because I want to. Because every single morning when I wake up, the very first thing I think about is whether you slept okay, and every night before I sleep, the last thing I do is check that your blanket is tucked in." The lock clicked softly. The door opened a crack. Maya stood in the gap, eyes red, nose red, a stuffed animal pinned under her chin. "What if you change your mind?" Sophie knelt down, held her hand out in front of Maya, palm up, and spoke slowly. "This hand will hold you when you're scared. It'll wipe your tears when you cry. It'll braid your hair every morning. It'll pull your blanket up every night. It'll hold your hand when we cross the street. It'll clap when you do something new. Every day. Forever." Maya stared at that hand, a hand dusted with flour. A small burn mark from the oven, nails cut short, no polish, the hand of a baker, of a caretaker, of someone who stays. She looked for a long time, then she placed her small hand on Sophie's, lightly, hesitantly, but there. "I'm trying to believe." Sophie smiled through tears and closed her fingers gently around that little hand in her palm. "That's enough." 6 months later, on a June morning, the bakery was closed, not because business was slow, but because today the shop was hosting a wedding. Sophie had chosen this place instead of a church, instead of the mansion, instead of any expensive restaurant Daniel's money could have rented. Because this was where everything began, where the gang boss had knocked on the door at 10 o'clock at night, where the white envelope had sat on the cash register, where she had leaned her back against the door, after he left and decided to trade 2 weeks of her life to save her mother, never for a single second imagining she would trade her heart as well. The shop was small, but that morning it looked like a dream. Aunt Carol and Sophie had been awake since 3 in the morning decorating. White flowers and yellow flowers arranged among the glass pastry cases that still held baked goods, because Sophie had wanted it that way. She wanted the guests at the wedding to still smell vanilla and butter mixed with rose, to still see heart-shaped cookies lined up neatly in the cases, to still know this was a bakery before it was a wedding venue, and that it would remain a bakery after the ceremony ended. Strings of small lights crossed the ceiling, old wooden tables covered with white cloths, chairs arranged in 2 rows facing the cash register where a small flower-covered podium now stood, and on the wall, the photograph of Helen when she was young, smiling beside the pastry case on the bakery's opening day, still hung in its old place, because Sophie hadn't taken it down. Her father had been in this shop from the very first day, and today he was still here. Through the photograph, through the old bricks, through the oak rolling pin his hands had once held, Helen sat in a wheelchair in the front row, right beside the aisle between the 2 rows of chairs. She was thinner than 6 months ago, skin almost translucent, a light oxygen tube resting beneath her nose, but she was here. Those 2 words were everything that mattered. The nurse accompanying her stood behind the wheelchair, but Helen didn't need reminding to sit upright. She straightened herself. She smiled on her own, the first smile Sophie had seen on her mother's lips in months. A weak but radiant smile, the smile of a mother watching her daughter happy and knowing she had been right to push her forward. Elinor sat beside Helen, 2 women who had never met before today, 2 mothers from completely different worlds. One who baked 16 hours a day to raise her child, one who controlled an empire from behind a throne. But both knew the smell of blood, the smell of loss, the fear of losing the people they loved most. Elinor held Helen's hand gently, silently, without words. Helen squeezed back. No words were needed. 2 mothers sat side by side, holding hands, and that was enough. Marcus stood guard at the bakery door. Black suit, earpiece, radio, professional as always. But Sophie noticed his eyes were slightly red, and when he nodded to her as she stepped inside, there was something warm in his gaze she hadn't seen from him the whole time she had known him. He'd never admit it, and Sophie would never ask. Music began softly from a small speaker in the corner, and the door opened. Maya walked in, 4.5 years old, wearing a pale pink dress, white shoes, brown hair braided into 2 perfect plaits. That morning she had helped braid it herself, sitting in front of the mirror, handing Sophie each section of hair and saying, with the seriousness of a child performing the most important task of her life, "You hold this part. Mom braids that part." Maya carried a small basket of white rose petals, and she scattered them with absolute seriousness, step by step, petal by petal, unhurried, unsmiling. Solemn like this was a sacred ritual she had rehearsed in front of the mirror for a week. Each petal placed on the bakery tile floor with the precision of 4.5-year-old gives to what she values most. Guests smiled. Some chuckled softly at the adorable seriousness, but Maya didn't notice. She reached the end of the aisle, stood before the flowered podium, and looked up at her father standing there wearing a gray suit. Not black, because Sophie had said, "You don't wear black on your wedding day," and Daniel had listened. The first time in his life, he had changed the color of his suit for a woman. Maya looked at her father and smiled. "Dad," one clear word rang through the small shop, and Daniel smiled, a smile he hadn't believed was possible 6 months earlier. Sophie walked in wearing a simple white dress. No long train, no complicated lace, just a well-fitted white dress Aunt Carol had sewn by hand. Her hair loose, holding a small bouquet, and on the apron she had taken off before putting on the dress. There was still flour dust from baking for her own wedding that morning. She walked down the petal-strewn aisle past Helen. Her mother squeezed her hand for just a second, then let go. Eyes wet but smiling, and Sophie stepped beside Daniel. The judge read the vows. Daniel and Sophie exchanged rings. And when he said, "I do," his voice was full of emotion but steady, steadier than any order he had ever given in his empire. Then came the special part, the part Sophie and Daniel had asked the judge to include. The judge knelt in front of Maya, an older man with silver hair and gold, rose-rimmed glasses, kneeling on the bakery tile floor, and asked in a formal but warm voice, "Maya, do you accept Sophie as your mother and allow her to braid your hair forever?" Maya looked at the judge, then at Sophie, then at her father, then back at the judge, yes. Then she raised one finger, paused dramatically, her large brown eyes so serious the whole shop held its breath. "But I only promised to eat almost all my vegetables." The whole bakery laughed. Helen laughed until tears ran down her face. Elinor laughed, the first real laugh Sophie had ever seen from her, not a polite social smile, an unrestrained one. Marcus turned his face toward the door, his shoulders shaking slightly. Sophie knelt in front of Maya, took both of her hands, and looked into the brown eyes she had loved since the first day in the cold mansion living room. "You promised to tell Mom when you're sad or angry. Don't hide it. Don't keep it inside." Maya nodded. "Seriously, promise, like the doctor taught. If I'm sad, I say sad. If I'm angry, I say angry. I don't have to be good for grown-ups to stay. Words learned in therapy, but spoken with trust. The voice of a child who had been through hell and learned that feelings weren't something to hide." Sophie smiled. "So we're officially a family now." Maya tilted her head, thought for a moment, then shook it. "We've been a family for a long time. This just makes it more official." Then Maya reached into the pocket of her pink dress and pulled out a plastic key. Not the old yellow one she had thrown away that night. This one was pink, new, shiny, one she had asked Aunt Carol to buy just for her, hidden in her pocket for a whole week, waiting for today. Maya pressed the key into Sophie's hand, her small fingers placing the light plastic into a palm rough from kneading dough. "It's the key to my room. Mom doesn't have to knock anytime." Sophie closed her fingers around the plastic key. And this time she knew it would never be thrown away again. The wedding celebration at the bakery lasted into the afternoon. June sunlight pouring through the front windows and laying a warm golden glow across the old wooden tables. The guest list was small Aunt Carol, a few of Sophie's old friends, a handful of Daniel's closest people, Maya's therapist, and the ones who truly mattered sitting in the front row. Helen in her wheelchair, Elinor beside her, Marcus standing guard at the door, but looking inward more than outward. The little shop felt warm and close. The faint scent of cookies still drifting from the oven Sophie had forgotten to turn off that morning. Nobody complained, because that smell was the smell of this family. Maya ran all over the bakery in her pink dress, her two braids bouncing with every step, until she stopped in front of Aunt Carol and held up a drawing she had been hiding in her pocket since morning. "Aunt Carol, look." It was a new drawing, 4 stick people holding hands. The tallest figure on the left had no hair. That was Dad. The figure on the right had long brown hair. That was Mom Sophie. The small figure in the middle with 2 braids was Maya. And the 4th figure, smaller than Maya, standing beside them, had short hair and clothes colored in with a jumble of bright shades because it wasn't clear yet. Aunt Carol frowned and smiled at the same time. "Who's the 4th one, sweetheart?" Maya looked at the picture, tilted her head. "Serious, a little brother or sister. I don't know yet, but there will be one." Then she ran off to show someone else, leaving Aunt Carol laughing until tears streamed down her face. And Daniel and Sophie looking at each other across the bakery, stunned, then laughing, then both their eyes filling with tears. Because that drawing had traveled a long way, from 2 stick people in the corner of a preschool classroom, to 3 stick people with a woman in a purple dress and red shoes that Maya once dreamed of, to a torn drawing of 3 figures on the night of separation, and now to 4 stick people holding hands, more than the little girl had ever dared to hope for. Then Maya disappeared into the kitchen and came back carrying a small plate. Walking carefully, tongue sticking out in concentration. On the plate was a misshapen sugary token of love. Crooked, the icing slanted, thick on one side and thin on the other. Powdered sugar uneven, the heart tilting to the right because the cutter had slipped when she pressed it down. Ugly, and the most beautiful cookie Sophie had ever seen in her entire life. "I made it for you, Mom." Maya held the plate out with both hands, eyes shining with pride.
I secretly asked Aunt Carol to teach me. I kneaded the dough myself, cut it myself, iced it myself, just like the first one you made for me when we first met." Sophie took the cookie and she cried. She didn't hide it, didn't turn away, didn't bite her lip the way she always did. She stood in the middle of her mother's bakery in her white wedding dress, holding a misshapen cookie her daughter had made with her own hands. And she cried in front of everyone, because that cookie was a circle completed, an answer to every question, proof that the love she had poured into this child had bloomed and come right back to her, in the form of the ugliest and most beautiful heart-shaped cookie in the world. That night, after the guests left, after Aunt Carol cleaned the shop, after Marcus drove the family back to the mansion, the three of them lay on the large bed in the master bedroom. Maya in the middle, as always, her head on a soft pillow, hair still neatly braided, her left hand holding her father's hand, her right hand holding her mother's. The room was quiet, filled only with their steady breathing and the soft wind outside the window. "Sophie," Maya's voice was small in the dark. "Yes, sweetheart. Before, I was scared you'd be gone in the morning. Every night when I closed my eyes, I was scared. I was scared that if I went to sleep, when I opened my eyes, you'd be gone. So I stayed awake a lot, kept opening my eyes to check, had lots of nightmares, a silence. I'm not scared anymore." Sophie squeezed her daughter's hand gently. Then Maya spoke, calmly, softly, as naturally as breathing, without hesitation, without asking again. Without adding, "Will you promise?" or "Will you stay?" or any conditions at all. "I love you, Mom. Mom." Not Miss Sophie, not Auntie, Mom, one word, this forehand. A half year. Old child had spent 3.5 years searching. Had gone through 10 days of happiness and 14 days of hell and 6 months of therapy and thousands of tears to finally say those words without fear, without wondering if the person hearing them would disappear. "I love you too, forever. You promise, I promise." Maya closed her eyes and slept, no thumb-sucking, no hugging the stuffed animal. The teddy bear had been placed on the shelf a week earlier. Maya had said, "The teddy can sleep on the shelf now. I have Mom. No nightmares, just the peaceful sleep of a child who had finally found home." Helen passed away 4 months after the wedding, on a quiet autumn afternoon, gentle and calm, just like the way she had lived. Sophie sat by her mother's bed as she closed her eyes, holding her hand, and the last words Helen spoke were, "I'm proud of you, my daughter." That night, Sophie cried in Daniel's arms. Cried all night, cried until there were no tears left, and he held her, said nothing, offered no words of comfort. Just held her because he knew there was pain that words couldn't reach. The next morning, as Sophie lay curled on the bed, eyes swollen, exhausted, the bedroom door opened. Maya walked in quietly, climbed onto the bed, lay down beside Sophie, and wrapped her small arms around her mother. "Mom, you're not alone. I'm here." And Sophie held her daughter, cried into her hair, into the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo. And she understood. Helen had been right. Her mother had pushed her toward Maya, not because she didn't need her daughter, but because she knew with the wisdom of a mother preparing to leave that love isn't holding on, love is giving. Letting go so the one you love can fly to where they need to be, no matter how much it hurts to release them. When people ask how they met, Daniel and Sophie tell the truth. They start with the desperate lie of a gang boss kneeling in a bakery at 10 o'clock at night, holding an envelope of cash, asking a baker to pretend to be his wife for 2 weeks. But they end with the truest thing they have ever known: love you choose every day, fight to keep, and promise never to let go. Because family isn't something you're born with. Family is something you build with messy mornings cracking eggs, with nights holding a child through nightmares, with crooked heart-shaped cookies, and with a plastic key of 4. Old presses into your hand and says, "Mom doesn't have to knock anytime."